morning. Thank you for being here. Thank you for everybody that's physically present and then all those that are watching online. We are so privileged today to present the Safeguard program, and I'm going to turn it over to Father Ivan here to start us off in prayer. But thank you again for joining us in the home ministry.
Let us just take a moment now to acknowledge our prayer, how powerful our prayer is. It's like faith. It can move mountains when it's done with faith and from the heart. And so from that place of prayer we pray. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Heavenly Father, we thank you for safeguarding our children. We thank you for the gift of wisdom and understanding and counsel and knowledge, to help us to grow with greater awareness how we might assist you in safeguarding our children. Help us to be open to the information that you share with us, and help us to share it with one another as you continue to create a kingdom of God for us. May it be a kingdom, dear Lord, that safeguards all our children. We also pray for those who prey on others, dear Lord, that they might be converted and they might come to realize the gift and the dignity that you have given to all of us as beloved children of God. May your mercy be upon us, and may we continue to place our hope and trust in you. And we ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
All right, so without further ado, we're going to get started. We are having a presentation today put on by One More Child by author Julie Lowe. And the Secret Service, unfortunately, our agent in the Secret Service got called away. The president of El Salvador is in town today, and that happened very, very suddenly, so he got pulled away to official duties. But we obviously will have Jody and Julie filling in for his portion of it to make sure that we don't miss any of the valuable information that he provided. And with that being said, Jody, you want to go ahead?
Thank you, Lisa. Well, my name is Jody Domingue. I am currently the acting chief operating officer at One More Child. My regular duties are as vice president for program operations and public policy. And I'll share a little bit more about One More Child later in the presentation. But I just want to thank all of you for the opportunity to come today and talk about difficult topics. Today's not going to be easy. But we pray that it will be enlightening and you will leave here feeling more empowered and equipped to serve and protect the children in your life. And you're really in for a treat. Now, Julie and I will be sharing today. I'm nowhere near as cool as the Secret Service, I understand that. But I will be sharing actually the exact presentation that our friend Nevada from the Secret Service shares. And that's from the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children. And we'll share a little bit more about that later. So hopefully you don't feel like you're missing out too much. We'll be sharing the similar information that he'll be sharing. But really, the treat today is going to be hearing from Miss Julie Lowe. So I've had the pleasure of knowing Julie now probably a little over a year, doing these tours all around the country. We've been in several different states and locations. And every time I sit and listen, I learn something from Julie. She's incredible. Julie is an author, speaker, and counselor. She holds a master's in counseling from Biblical Theological Seminary. She is a licensed professional counselor with over 25 years of counseling experience and is a registered therapist supervisor. Julie serves as a faculty member at the Christian Counseling and Education Foundation for over 20 years. And has lectured and taught at Misso Seminary and Westminster Theological Seminary. Julie has counseled families and taught and wrote books and spoke. You name it, Julie has done it. One of the things that I respect most about Julie and her husband Greg is that they are a living example. They have fostered and adopted children, spoken to the lives of children all over the country. We'll share more too about Julie's resources because she has written books on every topic you can imagine as far as raising children and safety and God's plan for our children and how we are to parent. Julie and her husband Greg live in Philadelphia, so she traveled down to Florida today. We're grateful for that. And have 5 children. They have served over 20 years as foster and adoptive parents. So again, you are hearing from a true expert today. She will change your paradigm on how you parent and think of how you keep our children safe. So it is my pleasure to introduce Ms. Julie Lowe.
Great. So, I do have 5 children, so you will hear some stories that we had to practice what we preach. So let me start off with one. As you know, this is such an important topic, and it's been important to me for years because I have worked in the child maltreatment field. I've counseled families that come from loving, godly homes who have still experienced these things. And serving as a foster and adoptive parent, we have seen this in our own home and invited those hard things in our home to work through as well. So early on, our 2 daughters, who are now in their 20s, they were about 2.5 and 3.5 when they came to us as foster children. And we were able to adopt them. And as soon as we found out we were going to be able to adopt them, I decided, you know what, they were very used to going into cars with anybody who picked them up for family visits, social workers, drivers. There was somebody new every week, and they were very indiscriminate about being willing to jump in a car with anybody. And so my fear obviously was, I got to start teaching them now it's not okay to just walk off with anybody who told them to. So once we realized we were going to be able to adopt them, I began teaching them that actually you shouldn't just get in the car with any grown-up who asked you to. And then I role play with them because I think that's an important practice to start role playing. And I would say things like, hey guys, if we're at the park and somebody comes up to you and says, I lost my puppy, don't go off with them. Here's what I want you to do. And you just say, no, I have to go talk to my mom and dad first and run and find us right away. Or if somebody says, hey, go grab some candy, you want some candy? And so I was giving them all these scenarios and saying, here's what you say, no, I have to go talk to my mom or dad first. Or somebody says, I have some balloons. So I would give them all these different scenarios, and then at the most unique times, I would say, hey, little girl, I have some candy, you want some? And they go, yeah. And I'd be like, no, here's what you say, you have to go ask your mom and dad first. And then we'd practice, and we'd be outside and say, hey, I lost my puppy, you want to help me? Okay. No, here's what you say, I have to go ask my mom and dad first. Or, no, I can't go off with a stranger. Practice after practice after practice. Until one day, the 4-year-olds looked at me and said, no, I have to go ask my mom and dad first. I'm like, high five, awesome. Here, have some candy and a puppy. Her sister, however, took a lot longer. And one day I said, oh girl, I have some candy, you want to come get some? And she looked at me, and I knew she knew what was happening. And she said this, well, what kind of candy is it? What was that telling me? What she was telling me is, I know the right thing to do, but I can be bought for a price. Now, what's really important about that is it was revealing the vulnerabilities, right? It was revealing what was the possibility, not just, we often think we have to protect our children from the dangers that exist out there, and indeed we do, but we also have the dangers within, right? Our own temptations, our own proneness towards what is wrong or potentially immoral. And she was revealing to us, I know the right thing to do, but I will be tempted to do the wrong thing. And that is equally important with our children, that we know their own hearts and their own dispositions. We often think we want to protect our children from the bully, but to you and I would think our child could be the bully. We want to protect them from the online predator, but do we ever think that potentially our young person could be the predator online? And in order to protect our kids, we have to also acknowledge that our children are capable of the very evil that we want to protect them from. And not many of us want to think of our kids that way, right? I don't want to think of my kids that way. But we're not going to help them if we don't help them take a look at their own hearts and know that their own hearts are prone to wander. So this is a great picture. I love this because I think how much I invest in my children and I pour out on them. And that we also want to protect them from those very dangers. So when I began talking about this, I would often go to churches after there were instances of abuse, and I would meet with individuals, we'd talk about prevention and how to be preventative as ministries or organizations. And it struck me, everybody was saying, Julie, what's the number one prevention? We talk about safety procedures and protocols and running clearances, and indeed all that's important, but it really starts in the home. That real safety starts with parents teaching their children in the home. And that wasn't being talked about at all. They couldn't understand why. And a lot of times it's because parents either don't know, or they don't know until after the fact, or they feel ill-equipped to know how to talk to their kids about such things, or afraid to. So I decided to start thinking about this, writing about it, talking about it, because I really do think parents are the first line of defense in protecting their children and equipping them. That when we equip kids, we don't raise fearful kids, we raise confident, competent kids. And I'll talk about that in a minute, but that's really key, that we don't want our children to be raised in a world where they're afraid of it, but that they know how to go out into the world and live in it and not be of it. So, I think about it, trying to wrap everything up in principles is really hard, but that's why the book talks a lot about practical things like babysitting and sleepovers and important things like that as well. But here's the foundational stuff that we need to think about. First of all, we need to accept that we live in a broken, fallen world where evil exists. That we're not naive to the fact that there are people preying upon our children, that are enticing them and pursuing them to do wrong, and going after them. So living in a broken world, then we need to know that we need to teach our kids how to navigate the broken, fallen world that they live in. What does it look like to help them go in the world and be not of the world, but to navigate it? And then ultimately, our safety rests in the hands of the Lord. That is so foundational, because if we don't believe that, then we're going to resort to all kinds of ways of trying to keep our kids safe that aren't healthy or wise. But at the end of the day, my job as a parent is to parent my children to the best of my ability, and then the rest is in their hands and the Lord's hands. That my job is not the outcome, though I care about the outcome. My job is faithfulness to the task of parenting my children well, and then leaving the outcome to them and the Lord. That the Spirit of God is at work in them, and will lead them. So, just in case we doubt whether we live in a broken, fallen world, we know that Scripture tells us so. That there are people that are troublemakers, that they speak peace with their mouth while evil is in their hearts, and that they pursue us, and they pursue those who are innocent or without guile, those who are naive or simple. And so it's really important that we are equipped. One of the things I often say is until children are old enough to keep themselves safe, it's our job to keep them safe. It's our job to be aware of the dangers out there in order to protect them while we're also educating them and equipping them. So, again, how do we teach them what to listen to and whose voice to listen to? And a key principle that I'm going to talk about is discernment, that we're teaching our kids to evaluate what is good and right. So I love this verse because it really breaks down exactly what I'll be talking about. Hebrews 5:14 says, "But sound food is for the mature, for those who have their powers of discernment, trained by constant practice to distinguish good from evil." Now I want you to think for a minute. We are really good at coming up with formulas, and I'll give you an example in a second. Formulas don't keep people safe, they just make us feel better. That if I have the formula and I apply the formula, then it will turn out well. We have a running joke in our home about cooking, that if you just have the recipe and you follow the recipe, everything turns out right. And we've had multiple disasters as a result of that. Why? Because it does take a little more than just a recipe, right? But if you have the recipe, then it must turn out exactly like it shows you in Better Homes and Gardens, where it shows you on all the beautiful cooking shows, right? No, it takes a bit more, that it takes an understanding behind it, of how things work. That is true with living life. That's true with having godly wisdom. That's true with parenting. It's true with a lot of things that we as people tend to create formulas. And we think, if I follow the formula, my children will always be safe. So what's an example of that? Stranger danger. If I teach my kids stranger danger, then my kids will be safe. However, we know statistically that 90% of children that are sexually abused are abused by people they know, not by strangers. So how in the world does stranger danger keep them safe? It doesn't. As a matter of fact, it actually prevents them from being safe, because if your child is ever lost, their very ability to approach a stranger is going to be vital to them. But if they're taught that strangers are dangerous, they'll never go to a stranger when they potentially need one. Instead of teaching them how to evaluate who to go to for help, we're teaching them what do we say if a child's lost? Anybody? Who are they supposed to go find? Policeman. Now, how often is a police officer around when you need them, right? I think that all the time when I'm driving on the highway, the maniac drives by me. And I'm like, where's the officer when I need him? Children are often not in places where they're going to easily find police officers. And if you say go find a police officer, especially for a young child, anybody dressed in an outfit, in a uniform, looks like an officer, including a janitor, by the way, right? Or somebody in the law, anybody wearing a uniform. That doesn't help them. So strangers aren't dangerous. I'll get back to that in a minute. So their very ability to approach a stranger if they're lost is going to be their lifeline. We're teaching them strangers are dangerous. And who is a stranger, by the way? When your children are young and you go into Target and there's somebody nice talking to them in line, do you say turn around and say hello to the nice lady? When you go to a restaurant, you teach your children to say hello to the waiter or waitress and order. When you go to the bank and you're standing in the bank line and the teller offers a lollipop, you teach them to say thank you and talk to them. So what are we teaching our children? They can't possibly know who a stranger is, because if you're friendly and nice to me, then you're not a stranger anymore. Well, guess who else is going to be friendly and nice to your children? An offender. Somebody who wants to hurt them, cause harm, somebody that wants to manipulate them. See how confusing that is. They end up going out into the world and think, well, nobody's a stranger if you're nice to me. If you're not nice, if a stranger is somebody who looks homeless, who has straggly hair, who's missing teeth, and they lurk in the darkness, right? That's who they think a stranger is. So, years ago, my two boys, I was taking them to the doctor's office when they're younger, and the doctor was going through all the safety precautions. Do you wear a helmet when you ride your bike? Do you wear your seatbelt? Do you know stranger danger? And both of my sons immediately turned and looked at me. And the doctor's like, what's going on? I said, well, actually, we don't teach stranger danger. Stranger danger is a myth. And he said, what do you mean it's a myth? And so I got into this whole spiel about why stranger danger was a myth with the doctor, who's still teaching kids stranger danger, right? That's how prevalent it is that we think about these things. It's a formula. If I know the formula and I teach my kids to be afraid of strangers, they'll be safe. Instead of teaching our children to go out in the world and know how to talk to strangers. So by the way, a practical tip I'll give you. If your child's ever lost, here's who they should go to. I say to our kids, go find a mom with kids. Yeah. Because the likelihood of me being somewhere where there's other moms with kids is high. A mom with kids, their maternal instinct is more likely to kick in, and they're not going to leave my son or daughter until they're safe and sound again with me. Now, you'll hear lots of different practical advice. Some will say go find a parent with kids, some will say go find a woman. There's no bad way of doing this, but here's my logic behind it. I will tell my kids, go find a mom with kids, and I'll pick on my poor husband, who will never do this because I've said it so much. But if I say go find a man, you know, my husband would see a child who's lost and say, I'll take you to the customer service area, or hey, there's a customer service area. He actually wouldn't do that. He finds that very offensive. But instinctively, moms tend to be more maternal. Instinctively, they're going to be more protective. They're probably going to keep that child with them until they know that they're in a safe place. That's the kind of person I want finding my lost child. Isn't that the kind you want finding your lost child? Now, we've taught our kids to debate with us, and so over the years, we would talk out, and they say, well, what if there are no moms with kids? Okay, well, I don't know where I take you, 5 children, where there aren't going to be other moms with kids, but okay, good question. What would you do if there's no mom with kids? And one of the kids might say, go find a dad with kids. Well, yeah, that works. Or go find a woman. Yeah, that works. What if there is no dad with kids? Okay, what if there's no dad with kids? Well, go find a woman. What if there are no women? well, I don't know what planet you're on anymore because I'm not taking you there, right? But the good thing about what they're doing is they're saying what if, they're brainstorming possibilities, and it's actually the skill we want our kids to learn. What would I do if I couldn't find what I need, or I couldn't find the person I need? That's what we want our children to learn. So, let me go back to this for a minute. We want our children to discern right from wrong. Not who's safe or unsafe, because we don't do that well as adults. We're notoriously bad at picking out people who are deceiving us. Because if people are polite and kind and nice, we trust them. But niceness is a decision. It's an ability to act a certain way. We don't always know what's in somebody's heart, right? So we want to teach our young people, just like we need to learn how to evaluate good from evil, right from wrong, wise from unwise, what's permissible from what's profitable, right? So a young child will say, well, he was nice to me, he's good. Or he's a good friend, he was nice to me. Well, when they get to be 13, you want that to be the standard. You want your 13-year-old to say, well, they're nice to me, so they must be good, even though they're doing drugs, or they're stealing, or they're cheating on their tests. No, we actually hope they're a little more discerning now. That's not just enough that someone's nice to you. Now you have to ask, are they good people? Are they wise? Do they make good decisions? And then as they get older, it's not just about good decisions, it's about what's profitable versus what's permissible. See, growing in wisdom and discernment means we're no longer just black and white concrete, but they learn to evaluate as they get older. So, Hebrews says, distinguish good from evil, right from wrong. How do they do that? Constant practice. Here's where a key element is role playing and consistently practicing with your children. And you cannot go out into the public without having numerous ways you can constantly practice. You could be sitting in a restaurant, and we'll often say to our kids, hey guys, I dare you to find a table where somebody's not on their cell phone. And they're looking around, and they can't. Or maybe they find one table where the cell phones are at least put down for the moment, right? And we're the only table where nobody has their cell phone out and are talking on it. And I'll say to my kids, what do you guys think of? What does that tell you? And one of them will pipe up and tells you we're the weird family. Yeah, maybe. But let's talk about that. Why do we teach you guys not to have a cell phone, right? Why do we teach you that's better to be conversational? See, that's not about talking about offenders and heinous things out there, but it is teaching them to observe the world around them and evaluate right from wrong, or wise from unwise, or permissible from profitable. Is it ungodly to have your cell phone out at dinner in a restaurant? Of course not. But what are we teaching them? Wisdom is profitable is living in a relationship and having face-to-face conversation and dialogue. You see, it doesn't just always go back to kidnapping and abuse. It goes back to teaching relationship dynamics. It goes back to teaching healthy ways of interacting. Because we're not talking to our kids about those type of things. We're not talking to them about how God designed sex and sexuality and the things that God created. And we're certainly not going to talk about the corruption of it, are we? Our kids need to know how God created life to be lived. And then they'll always spot the corruption. Our Secret Service agent who comes out often with us gave this example, which I always thought was true because I gave it as well. He said, when you teach somebody to be an expert at counterfeit money, they spend all their time studying the real thing. They don't study the counterfeit. They spend hours and hours, if not years, studying the real thing so that they'll see a counterfeit when it comes along. That's exactly what I want you to walk away with, that we want our children to know God and His ways, and how God intended life to be lived so well that they'll spot the counterfeit when they see it. That when they're interacting with their friends say something that seems off, or doesn't seem right, that they'll know it in their spirit, in their heart, right away, because they've been taught what is good and right. So constant practice. Whether we're going to the mall, whether we are hearing somebody speak, whether they're watching a movie, whether their friends are engaging with them. We're teaching them to evaluate at all times. Well, what do you think about what they said? What's good about that? What isn't good? What do you think about that movie and the message in it? What was right? What wasn't right about it? You see, that's the constant practice. In the middle of COVID, one of my kids came up to me, we were in a Walmart, and he came and he said, Mom, you don't believe it, 2 women are having a fight in the milk bottle. fighting for know-how. Yeah, one of them, they're yelling at each other because one has a mask and one doesn't. We had this whole conversation on the way home about why people would get so highly angry at one another over asking or not asking. Constant practice, right? You're teaching your kids to evaluate the world around them. That is what's going to be the foundation of keeping them safe. That they know God in His ways, right from wrong. That they learn to evaluate well. And then what does it give them? Powers of discernment. That the key really is we want to raise not kids who know the formulas, but kids that can discern, kids that are wise and can go into the world and know how to live in it. So wisdom and discernment are the foundation of safety skills. See, safety is not the ultimate goal. I care about safety, but I care more that my children know God and His ways. Safety then is a fruit of that. And see, if we back that up and we flip that around, what happens is we say safety is my highest goal, then we resort to all kinds of unhelpful formulas and things to do. But if my highest goal is I want my children to walk with God, to know God and His ways, then a fruit of that is they are going to be safe. They're going to be discerning. They're going to be wise. They're going to evaluate what's good and bad. So our goal is to raise confident, competent kids, not fearful kids. And when we talk about hard topics, it doesn't produce fear in kids. It actually produces discernment and maturity. So I hear lots of parents say, well, my child's too young to talk about sex, or my child's too young to talk about abuse, or my child, they don't know anything about these issues yet. And I'll say, but you need to be the one to inform them, not the world around you, because you won't like what they learn from them. And it's better to proactively shape the way a child thinks about a subject than to go back and debunk an inaccurate view. And trust me, no matter how much you and I teach our kids, the world is going to influence them, and we're going to have to be fighting up against the messages that they're getting. It's actively pursuing our young people all the time. The messages are out there. You can't be quiet. It can't be a one-time topic. You can't assume that they heard us and they understood us the first time, because the message, there's a constant bombardment of what normalcy is and morality is in the world around us. We have to be engaging regularly with our young people. So constant practice. So let me tell you what that means. When somebody says strangers are dangerous, what I always said to my kids is strangers aren't dangerous. Dangerous people are dangerous. Brilliant, right? Not so brilliant. How do you know somebody's dangerous? You watch their words and actions. Dangerous people can be dangerous, can be people you know or people you don't know, is what I would say. So what am I trying to do? I'm trying to break down the stereotype that I have to be afraid of people I don't know, and I don't have to be afraid of people I do know. Rather, dangerous people are dangerous by their words and actions. What am I teaching them to pay attention to? Words and actions, not who the person is. Now that's distinctly different than a lot of things we do in churches, right? Because I don't know about you, but I have spent a majority of my parenting journey trying to teach my children to obey. I don't have to teach them to disobey, they're quite good at that, right? However, it is good and right to teach our children when to defy authority. And children that don't grow up to learn when it's good and right to defy authority grow up believing a lot of godless systems and ideas out there, because they're swayed when they go into universities or when they go into school systems or when they hear somebody that has something to say to them. If I won't teach my children to evaluate, then they're going to be won over by the people who win their respect. They won't have that skill. So you have to start when they're young. You have to continue to do it when they're teenagers. You have to especially teach them to do it when they're in colleges, right? So if somebody tells you the right thing to do, you should always do it. What's the standard? Is it the person telling you? No, it's what they're telling you. If somebody tells you the wrong thing to do, you should never do it, and we will support you, is what we always add. Why? Because if I spend the majority of my time teaching my kids to obey, then they have to believe if they disobey or defy somebody, they're going to support them if it's right and good to defy them. So here's where constant practice is really, really important. So when siblings are fighting and they're telling each other the right thing to do, what's a typical thing for a sibling to say? You're not my mom, you're not dad, you can't tell me what to do. Well, guess what? Did they tell you the right thing to do? Yes. Then you should always do it. Doesn't matter who told you to do it. Who told you to do it? It's the right thing to do, you should always do it, whether it's your sibling, whether it's a teacher or a Sunday school teacher or a coach or a 2-year-old or the family dog. If it's the right thing to do, you should do it no matter who tells you. See, I always like to add a little humor in there for them because you can get way too serious about these topics. We try to be light. But here's where the playing field is level. If somebody younger than you is telling you the right thing to do, you should do it too. Doesn't matter. If it's the right thing, you should listen. If it's the wrong thing, you should never listen. So likewise, if somebody tells you the wrong thing to do, you never have to do it, and we will support you. That wrong thing could be from a coach, a teacher, a sibling, a friend, a babysitter. If it's the wrong thing to do, you never have to do it, and we'll support you. Now, this is where it's really important to role play. Because they know we're constantly teaching them the right thing to do, but they don't imagine people they love and respect, like a grandparent's going to tell them the wrong thing to do. And so we always pick on people close to them, the babysitter, the grandmother, the cousin, because they need to know that the people closest to them may encourage them to do something that's wrong, and they should never do it. So we would give our babysitter often a heads up, but we would use the babysitter often. We say, Melanie, the babysitter tells you the wrong thing to do, you should never do it, and we'll support you. Melanie never tells us the wrong thing to do. Well, good, I'll keep hiring Melanie then. But if Melanie ever told you the wrong thing to do, you never have to do it, and we will support you. What might be some examples of wrong things Melanie may tell you to do? And then they're stunned for a minute, and they start thinking, but here's another principle, put it in their lap to brainstorm ideas. Why? Because the more they can possibly come up with the ideas, the more they're prepared for them. So it's not just you and I lecturing at them, it's you and I engaging them, getting them to think and evaluate. So guys, what might be something the babysitter tells you to do that's wrong? Well, maybe she lets us watch a show you don't let us watch. Exactly, yeah, and you should never do that, and we'll support you. Maybe she tells us to lie about having extra dessert. Right, Melanie might tell you to lie about something extra that she let you do that we wouldn't let you do. Maybe she lets us stay up later and tells us not to tell you. That's right, perfect example. So see, they're able to start coming up with possibilities that Melanie, the babysitter, or a grandparent, or a cousin may have you do. And we'll say, if Melanie tells you to do that, you never have to do it, we'll support you. What if, here's where I go to silly stuff. Why? Because I want them to laugh. I don't want this to be a serious, overpowering conversation. What if Melanie told you to go running down the street barking like a dog? And the kids are thinking, well, she wouldn't do that. Good, I hope not. But if she did, you never have to do it, and we'll support you. What if Melanie told you we've got an in-ground pool? What if Melanie told you to climb up on the roof and jump off the roof into the pool? Oh, that would be so cool. No, that would not be cool. You should not do that, and we will support you. See, what I'm doing is I'm getting them to think about things that seem out of the norm. Then I go to the serious. What if Melanie ever asked you to let her watch you take a shower? What if Melanie ever asked you to get undressed in front of her? What if Melanie ever asked you to touch her? Now the kids are like, what? That's gross. Right, but Melanie or anybody, a grandparent, has anybody ever asked you to do this? We never have to, and we will support you. So what have I done? I've gone from the probable to the ridiculous to the potentially dangerous. And what they've learned now is mom and dad said weird things that we don't think would ever happen, but we've put the possibility before them and said, if anybody ever asks you to do this, you never have to do it, and we will support you. So they know now, mom and dad, if they, children who are raised in healthy homes don't have any point of reference for things like this. But if we give them a point of reference, and they're able to say, oh, mom and dad said if anybody ever makes me uncomfortable and asks me to do something like this, that they won't be upset, that they'll support me, I'm going to go tell mom and dad. So you see, we can't always promise that our kids won't be pursued by bad things like this, but we can equip them to know what to do if they are, and that they'll be more likely to handle it well or to tell quicker if we are willing to put out there the possibilities for them. Now, was the way I talk about that fearful at all? Was I scaring them, being mortifying? No. I talked about it in a way that was very matter of fact, very casual, even added some levity. Kids that grow up in safe homes don't imagine these things can happen. So they're not going to be ruminating over that. They're going to be moving on to the next thing. The hope is, should they ever be in a predicament like that, They'll call to mind, Mom and Dad practice with us. They told us if a grown-up tells us the wrong thing to do, we never should do it, and they'll support us. I need to go tell somebody. That's the importance of constant practice and having the words and the skills to do it. So here's what we've done. Somebody tells you the right thing to do, you always do it. Somebody tells you the wrong thing to do, you never do it, and they will support you. That is far better than trying to teach our kids who's safe or unsafe. Because we're the toys in that figuring that out. How would our children be good at that? But if we teach them discernment, we teach them to evaluate people's words and actions, you are raising competent kids. Now, the hard thing is that there's a lot of things that make us uncomfortable, and we don't know what to do with that. So, pretend you're in a church or you're in a social situation and somebody comes up to you and they're like inches away from you, talking to you. You ever feel a little uncomfortable with somebody being in your personal space? So you back up a little, and then they move towards you a little bit more. Now, are you unsafe? No. Are you uncomfortable? Yes. Is somebody maybe not aware socially? Yes. See, here's the hard thing with kids. I want to teach them to pay attention to what makes you uncomfortable, but everything that makes them uncomfortable is not a safety issue, but it also may be a safety issue. So I'm using words like evaluate right and wrong, pay attention to what makes you comfortable, notice what's going on around you. Because if you use those words, what you're going to stop and do then is evaluate. They're not immediately unsafe. I'm not going to say, if anybody ever makes you uncomfortable, you never have to do what they're asking you to do. Because on a regular basis, I make my kids uncomfortable all day long by making them take showers. I put on deodorant and do their homework, right? If the standards don't do what's uncomfortable, my kids are going to become the laziest kids in the world. But if the standard is pay attention to what makes you uncomfortable, what's the next step going to be? Why? Now I'm going to evaluate why. So you see a difference between the formulas that say stranger danger, just never do this, never let your kids have sleepovers, never do this. Which, by the way, we don't let our kids have sleepovers, there's some wisdom in that. But if I just come up with these rules, that's not what's going to keep our young people safe. Teaching them God and His ways and teaching them to evaluate the world around them, that will be their safety skill. That will be something that carries them for situations you and I can't possibly fathom or come up with. So, notice, pay attention to what makes you uncomfortable, and ask why. And so again, we'll pick on our own relatives. I'll say, has Grandma ever made you uncomfortable? Yeah, Grandma's made us uncomfortable. Oh, how? Well, she wants us to hug her and she smells like mothballs. So should I say, don't hug Grandma? No, actually what I say is, well, love moves towards people. Go hug Grandma, even if she smells like mothballs, right? However, if they say, Grandma makes me uncomfortable, I say, why, honey? And they say, well, because she makes us sit on her lap and she rubs her hiney. Well, guess what? You never have to hug Grandma and we will support you. My coach makes me uncomfortable. Years ago, I just got in the habit of trying to practice this, and it's easy, life goes on, you forget. One day I was driving my youngest son to a baseball practice, and I was just, I'm constantly coming up with conversational questions. And so I out of the blue just said, hey, any of your coaches ever make you uncomfortable? They said, yeah, actually one has. And then we'll stop the car. Like, really? What coach? And he told me about a coach, and I said, well, what happened? And he said, well, twice he's gotten in my face and just yelled at me out of anger. I said, really? I'm at all his practices and games, I never noticed this. And he was giving me the examples, and he said once was in the dugout when he thought he said something or he did say something, I don't know, but he got in his face and he was so close that, spit was hitting his face, he was so angry. Then he gave me another example, and I just said, Connor, I'm so sorry, that was wrong. Your coach, coaches get mad all the time. And he goes, oh yeah, my other coach, and he gave an example of his third base coach who yells at him and is highly, what's the word? Dramatic, maybe. And he said, yeah, he's just mad because he gets heated about the game. That's not personal. But this was personal, and we were able to talk through. We were stopping and noticing. We're evaluating what makes a normal coach able to yell and it doesn't bother you. What made this uncomfortable? Well, he's in my personal space. He was angry. He intimidated me, or I felt intimidated. I said, honey, I'm so sorry you felt that way. That was not okay. If he's ever to do that again, you come tell us and we'll talk to him. Or you can get up and move away. You should never, an adult never has permission to treat you that way. And we will support you. Now, was he being molested? No. Was he something worse going on? No, but that was so important. And if I hadn't stopped and said, hey, has any of your coaches made you uncomfortable with, by the way, I expect them to say no, or yeah, they made you mad, they made you run bases 20 times, like, it's normal kid stuff to say. But if you and I don't present it, if we don't even ask the questions, sometimes we miss really important conversations. We're not presuming that our kids are having the worst things happen to them, but we are presuming our kids are always interacting with things that make them comfortable and uncomfortable. You see, the language of that doesn't elevate it. I'm not walking around saying, has anybody ever touched you inappropriately? Though I think you can ask that. Has anybody ever molested you? I'm not elevating it. I'm saying, has anybody made you uncomfortable in a way that brings up any topic they would want to talk about? And that's vital, that our kids learn that we're safe people to talk to, that we notice things, and we're going to teach them to notice, we're going to help them evaluate how to handle the world around them. So the skill is learning to evaluate behavior, words, situations, not people's character. Now, we learn about people's character through evaluating their words and actions, right? The character, some people pretend to be a certain way at first. And it's in evaluating and watching their words and actions that we'll really learn what their true motives are. So, what's a better way? We want to teach them to recognize and discern what makes them uncomfortable. Teach them again, evaluate words and behavior, not character, until they're old enough to protect themselves is our job. So, maybe a parent goes into Target and says, all right guys, it's your job to keep an eye on me while I'm shopping. Well, that's a good idea in principle, but what 5-year-old is going to be keeping their eye on their parent the whole time when you have shiny toys and electronics going off and TVs playing and candy at eye level, right? I sincerely hope that as parents we know young children, it's our job to keep an eye on them until they're old enough to evaluate and know. It's true in parks, that when we go to parks, we don't have to be overly aggressive, but we do have to realize our children are unaware, they're innocent. So it is our job to keep an eye on them while we're educating and teaching them. And as they get older, we're giving them the skills. I want not to teach my children to be afraid of approaching strangers. I want to start teaching them how to approach strangers. I want to teach them to go up and ask for directions while I'm standing there watching them and I know they're safe. I want to teach them to walk up to somebody in the mall and ask a question so that they feel confident and competent that if they're ever separated from us or they're ever alone, that they are given the skills. So let me give you an example. We would regularly teach our kids, all right, if you're ever lost, go find a mom with kids, and what do you tell them? I'm lost. That's right. But what else do you tell them? You tell them your name. You tell them our name. What's our name? Mom and Dad. Our names are Julie and Greg. That's our last name. And we practice, and we say, what's a phone number? And so we would teach them one of our phone numbers, normally mine, and they'd rattle off the phone number. I'd say, okay. And everywhere we go, in less than 30 seconds, this would be a routine getting out of the car. All right, guys, what do we do if you're lost? Go find a mom with kids. That's right. And what do you say? Hi, I'm lost. My mom's name is Julie Lowe. Her phone number is 267-688. That's right. And we'd often have a meeting place. Like if we were going to the park and I say, if you're lost, see that big building right there or see something that was easy for them to recognize, we'll meet there. So years ago, we would go through this and less than 30 seconds before you jump out of the van. And they would often be rolling their eyes. By the time they're 9 or 10 or 12, I'm like, why are you making us do this again? It's always good to know, right? And constant practice brings it to mind. Because guess what? When we're afraid, things go right out the window, don't they? I mean, this happens to you and I. When we get in awkward moments, like we don't know what to say, everybody's uncomfortable, you forget what you're doing. And so the more it's constant practice, the more it's room for them to know what to do. So fast forward years later, we were at an amusement park in our area. And we're actually spending the night in a hotel, going to the amusement park. Our youngest was 2 years old, so I took him back to the hotel room early. And my husband Greg stayed with the 4 older kids so that they could keep having fun. And about 10 o'clock at night, they came into the hotel and there was crying and moaning and everybody upset. And I'm like, what in the world happened? Well, here's what happened. Of course, it's at night, so we're at an amusement park where music's blaring and lights are flashing and everything's going on, and 3 kids want to go on one ride, and 1 child wants to go on another ride. And so my husband gets them on this ride and says, when you get off, I'll be here right in the middle waiting for you. And I'm gonna go get this child on the ride, so when he gets off, he can see me, here's where I'll be. Puts 3 on one ride, 1 on this ride, and 20 minutes later, 1 comes off this ride, 1 comes off this ride, and 2 children are missing. So what happened was the 3 get in the ride, and 2 of them are like, I don't think I want to stay in this line. I want to get in this line. I want to go with William over in this line. And so they're having an argument. No, don't leave me. Dad said you need to stay in line. No, we're getting in the other line. So they get out of this line. Only it's 9 o'clock at night, and it's dark, and there's crowds, and there's shining lights and music playing that they can't find where this ride is. So they end up getting lost. So 3 go on, 1 comes off. And my husband's like, where's your siblings? I don't know, Dad. I told them not to get on the ride. Look, I stayed on the ride. Am I not the good kid? I stayed on the ride. And he's like, okay, great. So he waits and William gets off this ride. 2 others are missing. So now he's got to find 2 missing children. Guess where he found them? Not with a mom with kids. Teenagers. A group of teenagers. Which, by the way, would be the worst group you could ever find if you're lost. But to them, they were bigger. To them, it was, these people can help us, right? And we all know how helpful a group of teenagers would be to 2 lost children, right? It was a great picture of, here's a family who's taught their kids ad nauseum where to go, right? And in the moment of panic, did they follow through? No. Now, if they had been lost long enough, I think it was less than 10, 15 minutes, if they had been lost long enough, they may have kicked in what they needed to do. But that shows you the need for why it can't be a one-time conversation or a once-a-year conversation, right? It's got to be a regular conversation where ad nauseum that your kids are rolling your eyes down, your mom goes again. But why do we do it? Because we want to ingrain in them what's wise and good. We want to have them practice, because safe kids don't presume these things will ever happen to them. So they need the skills of it coming back pretty quickly to them. So here's the constant role playing, the practice that they need. I love this picture that I saw somewhere. So as parents, think about this as parents, this is true, it's probably true with any topic we can think of. If I take the easy road of putting off having these hard conversations because it feels awkward or uncomfortable or I don't know how or nobody ever had that for me when I was growing up, and we avoid the hard topics because it's the easy thing to do, it will lead to harder life choices and primarily for our children. However, if I take the hard road and I'm constantly discipling my kids, I'm constantly practicing with them, I'm constantly working to have these kind of relationships and build bridges and give them skills and teach them to evaluate even when they roll their eyes at me and think mom's a weirdo for doing this, it leads to easier life choices for them and prepares them. I'll give you an example. My daughter, who's in her 20s, a couple of years ago, she was working at preschool. And in the middle of the day, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, she took a break. She decided to go away from the kids and go to a local Dunkin' Donuts on a busy road in the community. She was drinking her coffee, probably scrolling Pinterest, who knows what she was doing. But when her break was over, she slowly started to pull out Dunkin' Donuts, and an elderly man, about the age of her grandfather, approached the car. So she rolled down her window, thinking maybe she had a flat tire or something. Broad daylight, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And he threw something in her lap and said, "Hey, I've been watching you for the last 20 minutes. You've got pretty eyes." She said, "Well, that's weird." She starts rolling up her window. When she looked down, it was a $50 bill. Now, she had no frame of reference for what to do with it. And as she drove back to work, she got to work and she began telling people, and all of a sudden, like the creepiness of that began to sit in, where at first she didn't know what to make of it. She's broad daylight, didn't think he was a danger to her. The more the day went on, the more upset she got over the scenario, because she realized how inappropriate it was, and how what, he was watching me for 20 minutes, and what did it mean that he would throw money on my lap? All these things that she could not make sense out of. I promise you, there's not a scenario in the world that I would have thought of in all over 20 years of life to bring that up and say, by the way, if somebody walks up to your car in broad daylight and throws money on your lap as you're driving off, here's what you do. See, that's where formless would work. But if I'm teaching her to discern, and I'm teaching her to recognize what makes her uncomfortable, she's going to pick up on it a lot more quickly. Now, our Secret Service agent will get up after me and tell that story, because what happens now is people put fentanyl on the money, or on a tissue, or on something right next to the door, so it knocks the woman out, and they can take advantage of them. Never would I thought of that scenario to prepare my daughter for. I talk about when you're alone and independent, when you're driving places, when you're going to a state park, hey, please make sure you just call somebody. It doesn't have to be us, we're not trying to control you, but let somebody know where you're at all times in case something were to happen, you broke down, something were to disappear, something, just let people know. You see, because when they get to their 20s, they still have things to learn. It's not just for 5-year-olds, or 12-year-olds, or 15-year-olds. It's also for 25-year-olds, it's also for 30-year-olds, it's also for you and I to be wise and aware and to evaluate the world around us. We all need these principles. But if I rely on formulas, the formulas wouldn't keep my kids safe. If I rely on giving them the skill to discern and evaluate, they're going to learn how to handle situations that maybe never came to mind for me, never entered into their mind. They're going to be more prepared, they're going to have wisdom. We know they're going to have the Spirit of God also guiding them. Because ultimately, as a parent, my job is to do everything I can to prepare them to go out into the world, and then I give them over to the Lord and say, Lord, they're yours, you keep them safe. And pray that God gives them wisdom that they'll want to do what's right and good. And that's where our hope lies, right? For somebody that does not walk with the Lord, I would live in fear all the time with all the dangers out there for my kids. And I still do. But I cannot possibly protect them from all the dangers. That's why I love the word safeguards, actually. Because safeguards doesn't presume bad things will happen. Actually, it presumes bad things will happen. That's why you need a guard. And that's why you need to be wise. That's why you need to have thoughtful ways of thinking about things. But they will come across dangers. They will come across hard things, and are we equipping them to know what to do when that happens? That's ultimately what our goal is. And then we trust our kids into the hands of the Lord and know that He loves them and He cares about them. So, on that note, we'll stop there. I'm going to hand it over to Jody, and she'll pick up.
Can we all get a hand for Miss Julie Lowe? We'll revisit a lot of what she says in the next portion of this, and I want you to just think about her soft counseling voice, soothing counseling voice, and all of these principles that she instilled. Because the second part of this presentation, we're going to talk about some scary stuff, and so, but some real stuff, some stuff our children are facing today, and some of the greatest dangers out there that we really need to make sure that we're teaching them safety skills about. So. Okay, so we're going to get started here. As I mentioned, and I'm just talking with Lisa and Father Adam's help, you can't hear what Julie just said and start to reevaluate everything. How you've parented and things that you could do better, and I know I have been on that journey for quite some time. I will just say I haven't always been that parent. I'm not Secret Service, but I do have a little street cred. I did investigations for the state of Florida for child abuse on institutions. And then I was one of the first investigators when the Department of Children and Families actually created a specialized unit for human trafficking cases. So we would investigate the human trafficking cases that came into the hotline. And so I was that parent that parented out of fear, right? My children knew that, if somebody's chasing you in the car, like you run to the other side of the road and run the other way. They knew those types of safety tactics, but not necessarily always doing it in the spirit of teaching them discernment. We are on that journey now. We've been on that journey a while. But I say all that to say, This next few segments, we are going to talk about some scary things. We're going to talk some things that are going to make you want to go back to that fear-based parenting. I'm going to ask you to resist that and to hold on to all the wisdom and knowledge that Julie just provided us with. Because we're going to talk about some of the most dangerous things that our children are facing today. Where do you think is the most dangerous place for our children right now?
The internet.
The internet. Thank you, Lisa. Lisa knows this all too well. She's a subject matter expert on this, I could say. But it is 1,000% the internet. And I know Julie has a lot of resources. We'll show those at the end. So please, she talks about this. What she just imparted to us, the wisdom she just shared, those are just nuggets out of her book, Safeguard, which is wonderful. And she's got a lot of resources that talk about the internet and different pieces as well. So I really encourage you to lean into those resources. But the internet is absolutely the number one most dangerous place for our children. And it is a place that, as much as we try to safeguard it, there's always ways that it will still impact or have access to our children. I don't know about you, but I do this for a living, and I still feel like I always have to research, be ahead of, find ways to protect my child from the internet, from online dangers, everything from phone calls and text to social media to gaming systems, you name it, right? We live in an online world. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that now. As I mentioned, this is the presentation that Nevada would have shared. It is actually from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC. We work with them very closely as well. NCMEC was created several years ago to really have this focus on child safety, missing children. Anybody see when they do Amber Alerts and then missing children posters, those are always generated through NCMEC. And so they are the premier experts in this space. It is the nation's largest and most influential child protection organization. They lead the fight to protect children, create vital resources for them, and the people who keep them safe. So we're going to go through this. This is just a few slides from their Net Smarts series. They have amazing free resources online for you and your children. So at the end of this, if you're like, I need something to talk with my child, to go through some resources with my child, then you cannot go wrong with them. Now, obviously, it is not it's a secular organization, I will say that. So as far as the spiritual components that you would want to add, you might want some different resources, but it's very good factual information. So their mission is to find missing children when children do go missing, reduce child sexual exploitation, and prevent future victimization. So that's their three key areas of focus. And reducing child sexual exploitation is, something that they are extremely involved in. Unfortunately, because of need, it has become an increasing effort over the years. So we'll talk about what that looks like. I think we're going to go through a few stats. First, let's talk about what reducing child sexual exploitation is. An exploited child is a person under the age of 18 who is a victim of any of these types of things. So child sexual abuse materials. This is any time a child is sexually abused and it's failed or reported. Online enticement of children for sexual acts. Child sex tourism, child sex trafficking, child sexual molestation, unsolicited obscene material sent to children. Unfortunately, this happens all too often. It is not at all, children aren't going out to look for it. I had a friend of mine call me just 2 weeks ago, and her daughter wasn't even her daughter's device. The daughter was looking over the shoulder of another child who was on a device, watching something they thought was innocent in a social media type of chat room. And in that child, somebody came up on the screen and exposed themselves out of nowhere. And again, the mom calls me and she's like, I don't allow my child to have a device. We were in a public setting. She was just viewing something we thought was innocent. Several parents were right there. And again, she thought she was doing all the right things to keep her child safe. But even that is considered child sexual exploitation. Misleading domain names. This is interesting to me, and if you really research this, it'll, again, just make your belly turn. But what a lot of people don't realize is a lot of these larger and smaller websites, right, that you can go online and view pornography and different things. Well, if you they'll buy domain names that are misspelled words. So if you are a 9, 10, 12-year-old child and you're starting to learn about anatomy, right, and you go online and misspell a word, it's going to take you right to a pornography site because they actually buy those domain names in order to catch those children early. So it is very nefarious, unfortunately. Misleading words or digital images on the internet, all things that they focus on. So this is child sexual abuse facilitated by the internet, basically. And this is the greatest threat facing our children today. Now, it doesn't mean everything else isn't a threat, right? It doesn't mean that we don't need to protect our children from people that we know are dangerous, that we don't need to teach our children the powers of discernment so that they can detect when someone is dangerous in the physical world. That still exists, so we don't want to ignore that in place of being, only hyper-vigilant here. But this is a space as parents that it's like we've got to wake up our senses to. We 1,000% need to understand where the world is, where it's going, and how do we apply all the principles that Julie just taught us, right? That, again, she elaborates more in her book and other resources. But how do we apply this to this very scary world? It kind of scares all of us a little bit, right? Because it's just so vast, it's so unreleased, and it is literally designed to create future users. So when I share the example about misled words on the internet, what they're doing is they're securing users for the rest of their life, right? Because we know pornography is addictive. And the earlier you can hook somebody, you have a lifelong consumer, right? And unfortunately, that is the world we live in. And so we need to learn how to we need to teach our children the powers of discernment when it comes to online. So the Cyberline for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, they do several things, but one of the things that is most beneficial and has been just revolutionary is they have a tip line. And what they do is they will send all of these tips down to local law enforcement to then work with these very specific tips that they're taking in. So in 2023, they had over 36 million calls to their tip line. Regarding child exploitation. And here are some of the top reporters. Now, this is good, right? These are social media entities. They're reporting. You would think this is good at face value. But what this is also telling you is this is where the majority of exploitation is occurring. And so we think of things like Facebook. I hate to break this to you if you haven't heard this before. But if you are an avid Facebook user, according to the population or generation younger than us, we're old. So if you haven't heard that already, we're no longer trendy. I'm perfectly okay with that label, but my children let me know that all day on social media. But Facebook, and again, how many of us are on Facebook, right? We share pictures with our relatives. We keep up with different things that we're interested in. And it is one of the largest places for child sexual exploitation. It's still happening on Facebook. And I don't know, and I really just encourage you because there's a lot that happens. Last year, there was a huge hearing in the Senate that brought all of the players from these big social media organizations in. They spent almost a full day doing testimony. And their feet were held to the fire, which was a very good thing by our legislators on the federal level. But when you start to hear how egregious their practices are, They want to give themselves a pat on the back, right? We're sending 17 million tips, but the reality is this is a drop in the bucket. I mean, they would go through just example after example of why didn't you send this, why didn't you send this, why didn't you send this? I know Lisa, she is a subject matter expert on a lot of this space and has worked with this personally. But if you kind of get into the details of what our social media is doing and allowing to go on and not reporting, it's hard not to be angry about that. So we have to remind ourselves that justice is the Lord's, but it is our responsibility to make sure that our children are safe within these spaces. So again, you tell the big players, Instagram, Google, WhatsApp, Snapchat, X. There will always be these big players. There will always be lots of social media apps out there. We get requests a lot about, and I'll talk a little bit later about what all of our team does, but we get a lot of requests from parents, just tell me what to tell my children to stay away from. And so I could do that, but the truth is I could get you all the latest list of all the biggest offenders, but it's going to change is the issue. You'll always have these big key players, right? And again, we're users of some of these things. We have to think of the implications of what does that look like. You have to create rules within your home, just like Julie said. Know your children. Know when your children really are capable of handling these types of things. Interestingly enough, the state of Florida actually passed a bill last year that said children really shouldn't have access to this until they're at least 15, 16 years old. And so the state of Florida already took some step in that direction. But there will always be others, right? You got Facebook, you have Instagram, you have Snapchat, you have X, or what I always know as Twitter. But you have others. You have ones called Discord. I had a parent reach out to me, good friend of mine, I don't know, it was probably 6 months ago, and she said, our pastor wants to use Discord for as an application so that all the children in our youth could chat, and you had told me something about that. Is that a good idea? And I said, absolutely not. Just, Google them. I mean, any big case that you're seeing about sharing child sexual abuse material or anything like that, and that's a big facilitator of that, right? But they're marketing themselves as an app where people can meet and have conversations and share updates. So there's just an underbelly to all of this. So my advice always is just know what your child is doing. Just know. Just be very, 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 very involved. Set rules and expectations and check in constantly. Monitor constantly. We'll talk a little bit more about those things later on. So here's just some demographic information. Again, this is really hard stuff, and I know, but it's good to be aware of. So these are statistics on children who were offended on, we'll see, predominantly 62% are female, but 38% were male. I do want to acknowledge. And a lot of times too, and I'm a boy mom, a lot of times we think we need to apply different rules to our boys. I'll tell you, I'm very mindful. I understand the power that my sons could have, right, if they weren't raised in a way that we know is the Lord's will and how we protect people. And it's a great responsibility in raising a male to be responsible and protective of women and seek human dignity and really walk in that way. But also we need to not forget that they can also be victimized. And so we need to teach them the discerning characteristics, just like we need to our females. Sometimes we think of, girls, I've got to be protective, right? No, you have to be protective and discerning regarding both. They have ages up there, obviously. Pubescent being the highest, but prepubescent, 33%. These are children under the age of about 12, 13. Again, very high. And then this circle right here really just hits home what Julie just said about stranger danger. Because it's talking about the percentages of relationship to the child, what the offender was. So other relative, neighbor, or family friend, these are huge statistics a babysitter or a mentor. Actually, the smallest ties I see are unknown to the child. Do you see how small that is? Now, online enticement, that's likely unknown to the child. But again, were they a stranger? Probably not. That might have been someone who started out in their gaming chat, right? That they played some games with, they got to know. And if you ask that child if that person was a stranger, they didn't tell you no. So it just depends on how that relationship was formed. The increase in reports. Oh my goodness, we talk a lot about COVID, right? And how COVID sent everybody home and sent all of our children to the internet. It sent all of them online. And there's a lot of truth in that. We just look at over a 300% increase from 2021 to 2023. And I don't think this is going to slow down. I think it's like, we now have a rocket fuel, right, as far as where we're going and being more of an online world and the online dangers to our children. So these are increased reports in online enticement. These are people who are getting in line and enticing our children to do things sexually online. So these are the two resources. So Kid Smart, so this is designed for your children to understand risks and safety. I would just empower you as a parent. Go online, check these resources out, see if you feel like they're appropriate to talk with your children, depending on their age. NetSmarts is online safety program. It is K through 12, so it's not gonna go all into the scary stuff at first, but it will talk about more age-appropriate things as they get older. And so these are two resources that are available to you to talk about online safety. One thing I want to talk about, these are different quotes. One of the biggest threats to our children right now is something called sextortion. And I was, a couple months back, we work a lot with federal law enforcement, local law enforcement, and I was sitting with one of my friends who's with the FBI, and he was talking about they have more reports with sextortion than they did at the time for CSAM, which is formerly called that child pornography. Now the director for that is child sexual abuse material. More reports than that, human trafficking and terrorism combined. They had more tips about sextortion. And again, I think it's the newest threat to our children that they're going to have to combat. What it is really is it's coercion. And we'll talk about those elements in a little bit, but it's when our children are encountering someone who may pose as someone who wants to be in a relationship with them, a peer, somebody who poses as the good guy, right? But they're gradually increasing their boundaries. And eventually they convince them to share a picture, an inappropriate picture and an inappropriate video. And then what they do is they hold that over the kid's head, the child's head, to then see more. And then this child's ensnared in this cycle of exploitation. And this is very common. Now, I know most of us, right, our children are in private school, in Catholic school, Christian school, and homeschool. We don't think that this could happen to them, but I just want to caution you. We don't know, as Julie said, right? How much do we know the heart of our children and their vulnerabilities? We certainly don't know the heart and vulnerabilities of all the children around our children, right? And so Lisa was just sharing with me that this has happened in this very local area in a Catholic school. This happens in homeschool settings. This happens almost anywhere. So I just want to caution you, this is something we need to be talking to our children about. Talking about culture these days. Sadly, I know it's startling to our spirit, but when we start to talk about to our teenagers about sending new photos, for some of them it's going to be very normalized, right? Especially if they're in public school. I hate to say it, but these type of things, it's just normal trends. Not saying that that child feels okay with that, but they're hearing their peers talk about it, right? And so we need to be comfortable talking about these types of things. So these are some just quotes. So NetNet created a whole section called Take It Down. There's actually federal legislation. I think it's going to be signed next week into law. made law next week, which is very exciting. It's called Take It Down. And because historically you would think if a child shares something, right, or if a video is posted, it would be very easy to call and say, hey Twitter, hey Facebook, hey whatever, this is very inappropriate, this is child abuse, this is exploitive, take it down. And sadly, it's been not that way. Obviously, it makes a teaching class on this, but it's sad how neglectful these spaces have been in taking down exploited materials for children. And part of what our teams do is we work with these children after the case of young adults, and it will wreck their lives. Because we say this, Father, I was just talking about this, everything is recorded, and it lives in perpetuity once it's online. It's very difficult to get things off. And I'm just going to be very crass, I have been to too many children's funerals. I've comforted too many parents who have gone down this road and it has wrecked their lives because they could not take something off the internet that was there. So again, we need to make sure that we're talking to our children about this. Luckily, this law is going into effect. It's a huge win. NECMEC has created this entire division called Take It Down. And if there is anything that is shared that is exploited, they now have a process that will help to actually take it off the internet. And so this is a huge resource. And I'm going to circle back around to this because, again, all of this is very scary and alarming. But the reality is we also need to teach our children that if they have made a step in the wrong direction, right? If something is out there that they are ashamed of, that it does not need to keep them in prison, that there is freedom from that there is resources for that, right? And so we need to create this narrative that it is never too late, that their lives aren't destroyed and over, and that we have a redeeming God, and that luckily there are people who fight for redemption. Lisa being one of them, our team, Julie being another, and because of that, people admit that because of that, there is resources to redeem the situation, right? Now that's not a trauma won't be there, not that there won't be other things, but there is a process. So please keep this. I pray you never need this for your child or any child you know, but you might run across somebody, and just let them know there are resources out there that will be able to take them down. Okay, and then support. It really focuses in crisis intervention, peer support network, mental health and community support referrals, reunification assistance, long-term emotional support, prevention strategies, and then legal referrals. Again, as you can imagine, the trauma that occurs off of being exploited online, not only to that child, but to that family, right? And we're going to talk about a little bit more what that looks like. I never not do a presentation and have someone say, not have someone say, I'm worried about this child in my family. I'm worried about this child who attends our church. I'm worried about this child who goes to school with my children. They're usually somebody in the room has somebody in their lives that they're worried about. And so it comes with a lot of trauma, and that affects the family, right? That affects everybody in the community. And so NIFMIC has resources to be able to talk about that and how to support. Because as caregivers, we go through our process once our children have gone through this type of trauma. And it can raise awareness through different things. I really recommend go online, let's use it for good and not evil, and follow NIFMIC and all that they're doing. They really are the national experts. And that's some more of their information. So I'm going to talk now, and we'll do Q&A at the end. I know this is probably going to bring a lot of questions about online safety. I'm going to talk about it a little bit more in my next presentation. I do want to talk a little bit about One More Child, which is an organization that I work for. One More Child has been in existence for over 120 years. We have some key areas of focus. We focus on foster children, trafficked children and adults, hungry children, single moms, and struggling families. Basically families that are trying to make ends meet, trying to make the right decisions, trying to empower them so that they can raise their children and their children don't end up in the foster care system or end up in some sort of exploitive situation. So I have a video just to show kind of the heart of what we do and talk a little bit more about that. Maybe not on this now, but.
So many times through the past many decades I've been working in Christian child welfare, a child has looked at me and said, surely somebody saw me. Surely somebody knew what I was going through. Surely somebody saw that I was being sexually abused. I mean, surely somebody saw that. Surely someone knew that I was neglected, that I was hungry, that something was wrong in my life. Why didn't someone intervene? And at One More Child, we're here to say, we do see you. We are going to get involved. We do get involved. The Lord sees them and we see you. We are called to see the unseen. Did you know there are over 2,000 verses in the Bible about poverty and justice? It is the heart of God to see people. He cares about what happens to them. And we've got to care. We've got to decide that we care and jump in the mess with them. Jesus is all about the spiritual, but he's also about the physical. And it's interesting, we can't separate those. It's not either or. As a Christian body sometimes say, go and be well. Well, what are you going to do about it? You know, what tangibly are we doing? And at One More Child, we see you and we jump in with you and we want to do something about it. We want to feed you. We want to help you get through your trauma. We want to clothe you. We care about you physically. The physical needs of people matter to Jesus. And so it's so important with what we do at One More Child to see children. We need to see them because God sees them.
So I want you just to know a little bit about One More Child because we are a resource in the area. Our headquarters is right in Lakeland, Florida, but we are in 19 different countries around the world and have programming throughout the U.S. And one of the biggest things that we do here in the Orlando area, greater Orlando area, is our anti-trafficking work. When I talk about anti-trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation of children, it really comes from the expertise of the work that we do on the ground here. And if we do these other things, we really care about feeding children. We served over 19 million meals last year to children. Anything that can make a child vulnerable. But this is kind of the main thing that we do in this area. We work a lot with Lisa and just different experts in the field here when we talk about children who are being exploited. Last year we served over 1,000 individuals who were impacted by sexual exploitation. And so we have teams on the ground doing that. We do a lot of director service work, and we do that in a couple different ways. We have advocates who are linking individuals who are either at risk or have been confirmed for sexual exploitation to resources. Right? So if this is a child that might be, the parents might need some resources for family counseling, or maybe they don't have a stable place to live, or maybe they don't have food, and food insecurity. And so we're linking them with those type of resources. For an adult, it might be some safe shelter, right? It might be a job, it might be job skills, it might be education. We also have lived experience experts, so we employ survivors, people who have lived through that journey of sexual exploitation, to do mentorship from that perspective, right? Because that's a perspective I'm not going to be able to give somebody, right? As if I have not lived through that same experience. And then last, mental health counseling. So one of our largest teams is right here in the Orlando area doing work every day. Why do you think one of our largest teams is right here in the Orlando area?
Hotels and motels,
Hotels and motels.
Jacksonville, Florida.
Absolutely, all the way down to side.
International airport.
It's an international airport.
Tourism, which is
Tourism. Yeah. All correct answers. Yeah, it lives here, right? It lives right in this very area that we're in for a multitude of reasons. All of those things are correct, and they're all feeders into people being exploited. And there's also other factors too. Any child, and I would say, this occurs in every community. And in the United States, every single community, human trafficking and sexual exploitation occurs. What we don't always do is define it the right way. We don't see it the right way. And yes, Orlando ranks every year of one of the top cities that exploitation exists in, unfortunately. The average age of anybody entering into commercial sexual exploitation is actually under the age of 18. It is a minor. Now, I'm leery about statistics on this topic because they're not very good. There's not a large body of research out there on this. But you'll read reports, and the average age into entry is anywhere between 12 and 16 years old. But what that tells you is they're minors, right? A lot of us still have children at home that are that age. So let's talk a little bit about child sexual exploitation because, we think of human trafficking and we think of what that looks like, and sometimes we prescribe that to what we see on social media or what we see on movies. A lot of those movies that they're depicted on, those happen overseas. And yes, human trafficking is a huge problem overseas, but it actually looks very, very different than how it occurs here in the U.S. And typically, we're not going to have someone, especially a minor, just wake up one day and they're being trafficked. That's usually not how it occurs. And how it's depicted on social media is oftentimes all wrong. Anyone seen something on social media that talks about people following people, in the public's parking lot, right? They were targeting that mom and young children, right, to kidnap them and traffic them. Or zip ties on cars. Have y'all seen that one? Somebody will tag a car and put a zip tie on the handle, and they're marking it so that they can later track them down and exploit them. Wayfair. Do y'all remember the Wayfair thing? Anybody remember that? Wayfair was trafficking children. That was what kept all social media. They're really missed. Majority of those things are missed. And what's so difficult is, and we all chuckle because it's a big deal, and some of us we know our conspiracy theorists because they're like, kind of looking into it. And I get it, some of us lean that way. But the reality is that NCMEC, the FBI, Homeland Security, got thousands of tips about children being exploited by Wayfair. And they had to deal with those. Now, what does that do? That distract resources from people who are actually being exploited. So this is one thing I'm going to ask, just to be a good citizen, right? You see those things online. One, don't share them. Be the skeptic, look into them, right? Are we just sharing myths that are making people look for something totally different than what sexual exploitation actually is? And then two, just caution your friends. When they bring something up and it's kind of seems a little off. The way everything felt a little off. And so that was out of control. But it's not at all what that looks like. When we talk about exploitation, again, we're talking about things like sex torture. We're talking about our children who are in these peer groups, right? And then all of a sudden in these peer groups, conversations start to come up that really paint sexuality in a different way than how we know the Lord created it to be, right? And then those conversations start to stretch boundaries, and those boundaries start to have our children do things that we didn't think they were capable of, and then all of a sudden somebody's going to see that vulnerability and it is exploited on, right? Oftentimes that is actually how it happens. It's interesting, you know, our teams will go out, and I speak at a lot of universities, which I'm grateful for. One, I'm speaking at universities about sexual exploitation, it's way too late. We should be talking to our children way sooner than that. But I'll go to a university, and you can say something about feet pictures, sounds bizarre, I just follow me, and everyone will start laughing. Why? Because they know about this, right? They know that there are people out there, it's kind of a running joke, you can sell pictures of your feet and make money, right? And they know about this. Well, here's my question, why would somebody buy pictures of somebody else's feet? It's not about feet, right? We prescribe it to that, but what it's about is people who are looking for vulnerabilities, who are going to gradually increase those boundaries. If I'm willing to send a picture of somebody, of my feet, for $25 to somebody, what else am I willing to do? That's nothing to do with me. It has to do with a gradual increase of boundaries. And that's how sexual exploitation happens, right? It normalizes the abnormal. And this is why what Julie said was so powerful, because our children need to be attuned to what is that moment that this person's action starts to be wrong. Because that's the thing that we miss in this continuum, right? Of this grooming, this expanding of boundaries. It is so subtle, and the people who are doing it are so skilled that it's really hard to see when it worked. It's so hard to see. So that is exactly why when she tells us to really train our children to have that discernment, to know when is the moment that it got weird, when was the moment it got inappropriate or uncomfortable. For me, that'd be anybody asking for pictures of my feet. But again, our children live in a different world. Our children live in a different society. It is harder to be a child now than it ever has been, right? Julie, I was kind of you or Nevada in one of our presentations, but we were talking about how we're trying to teach our children to swim, and the currents are stronger now than they've ever been, right? And so what seems abnormal to us might be very normal to our children and what they're talking about in their peer group. So again, sexual exploitation is a gradual thing. It can start off as child sexual abuse material, right? And this is another thing to caution our children on. If they're sharing videos and pictures amongst themselves, guess what they're sharing? They're sharing child sexual abuse material. They're sharing it themselves. Child sex trafficking, and then we talked a lot about sextortion. So, human trafficking, this is a very legal definition. It was defined by the TVPA, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act in 2000. It was reauthorized several years back. And I will boil it down. It talks about the elements of using force, fraud, or coercion in order to induce a person to perform a sexual act for commercial gain. Now, if somebody's under the age of 18, they don't have to use force, fraud, or coercion because children under the age of 18 cannot consent, right? We know that as law. I will tell you, though, force, fraud, or coercion are the biggest means that people are lured into sexual exploitation. And we can break those down and what they are, because we talk about human trafficking, we think about the force element, right? We already talked about this in kidnapping. Kidnapping is less than 1% of all human trafficking cases. Less than 1%. In the U.S., we don't need to be as concerned. Again, we always need to be vigilant. We always need to teach our children, to be aware of their surroundings and discerning. But we need to be less concerned about them being kidnapped from the parking lot as we need to be more concerned about who are they talking to online. That's the person who's most likely, right? COVID was really hard because there was a lot of this going around during COVID. And I just remember I really had to harness my feelings about this, but there was so much going around about our children being masked, and now they can be kidnapped and they can be trafficked, right? So much easier. And all I kept thinking is, well, they're all online and nobody's monitoring them. That's how they're going to be trafficked, right? That's how that's going to happen. It's going to have a lot less to do with masks. So force is not usually the entry in to sexual exploitation or human trafficking. Now, it is often a means to keep someone, right? Because again, I might use one of these other tactics like fraud, and fraud is as simple as I want to be a boyfriend. Fraud is that simple. I will give you a better life. I will love you better than your parents. I will buy you whatever you want. I will give you a place to sleep tonight, right? I will give you love and acceptance. That is fraud. And it might start off as fraud, and you're going to build those trusts and those bonds. But at some point, there might be a force element. There might be an element to keep this person scared and keep them in. So when we're talking about human trafficking in the U.S., and we're talking about the elements of fraud, right? And we're talking about an exchange for a commercial good. Well, what's a commercial good? It's anything of that, right? It's an iPad, a phone, shoes, food, a place to sleep, right? So when we start to think about our populations, when we start to think about populations, especially around this area that we know, they're hotel living, motel living, right? And this child who's lived through a lot of transition, some trauma, they're living in a motel with their parents, they start to run away, right? Because now they don't want to deal with it anymore, and they're now in a crowd that are making bad choices, they're using drugs, they're doing whatever, and all of a sudden they don't have a place to sleep that night. And someone approaches them and says, hey, you can stay with me, right? But that turns into a transactional relationship, but that means she now feels pressured to have, sexual contact with that person. That is human trafficking. And that occurs all the time here in the U.S. So do you see how definitions, sometimes we get wrapped up in definitions and what this looks like? It looks very, very different here. And that's a lot of the cases we see. That's not all the cases we see. We're seeing increasingly more and more children who are coming from two-parent households who regularly attend church and they're part of the body of Christ and they're doing all the right things, but their children are trying to find love and acceptance now online or through different means. And then the last thing, coercion, the act of using intimidation to compel a victim to cooperate. I think sextortion is the biggest example I could use of that, the biggest one that our children are facing. So it's a $150 billion a year industry. That is massive. That is second now to the largest international crime of, so it's drug trafficking and then human trafficking. Third is arms trafficking. Actually, when I started working in this field, arms trafficking was second. So it's now surpassed arms trafficking. If I'm a criminal, I will choose human trafficking. And there's a couple big elements to that. If I sell drugs, right? If my crime of choice, which usually criminals do a little bit of everything, but if I'm a criminal and I choose to sell drugs, what happens when I get pulled over and I'm transporting drugs? Can I hide those drugs? I mean, maybe, but usually not, right? I mean, once they find them, I'm busted. But if I'm a human trafficker, right, and I have groomed this person to be loyal to me, to hate law enforcement, because that's what they're doing, right? There's a brainwashing process of that. If I scare them to think if they say anything that they're going to be physically in danger, their family's going to be physically in danger, now all of a sudden I'm a trafficker and I'm driving down the road and I have the victim in the car. What happens when I get pulled over? Is she going to rat me out? Is she going to say anything? Absolutely not, right? So we talk about reward versus consequence. There's a lot of money in this crime, unfortunately, and the consequences are much, much lower. It's much, much more difficult to get caught. It's a worldwide problem. 27.6 million victims worldwide. That's according to the International Labor Organization. Average recruitment, again, I'm weary about statistics. However, this is consistent, across the studies that I've seen. It's very, very young. So we talk about having conversations with our children, and I was really mentioning having age-appropriate conversations. If we start to have conversations with our children about sex and God's creation of human beings and what the Lord's plan for all of that was, right? Because that's how we're going to start that conversation. If we start doing it at 15, did we do it early? No. I would just tell you, whatever age you think it is, it's probably a little bit lower, right? And again, because we're helping our children form a biblical worldview of these things, right? So we need to start very, very young, and we need to start how God created it. We need to start with the good, right? Because what we know is that the world has corrupted all of it, and if you wait too late, just as Julie said, the world is going to be the one informing our children, and that is the last thing that we want. So we want to have age-appropriate conversations about this early on. We talk about less than 1% of all victims are kidnapped. Traffickers were victims through grooming. Grooming is a process. Grooming is now a crime in the state of Florida, which is very exciting. They passed that last year. They passed a law. I know they want to kind of enhance it and do more things to it. But if there's anything we need to make sure or always have our discerning eyes on, it's, in what ways could my child be groomed? And this goes right back to what Julie talked about is what are the vulnerabilities of my child, right? What are the things in my child's heart that make them vulnerable? Because that's exactly what people who want to victimize their children are looking for. They're looking for those vulnerabilities so that they can exploit them. So we need to know them as well. And it is a gradual increase of those boundaries. Pornography and the objectification of women and children are the biggest drivers. And it's something that, again, I think we need to have more open, honest dialogue about. There is, it is very true when they say that all sex buyers, or all people who watch pornography will not turn into sex buyers. All people who are sex buyers have watched pornography. It is the inroad. It is the gateway drug. It is the thing that has corrupted our society to the point now that we have 27.6 million victims of human trafficking worldwide. And it's something that we do need to address as a society. And I talked about earlier the domain names, right? The misspelled domain names. Again, there's a lot of statistics out there about the average age in which our children are encountering this online accidentally. And I really want to emphasize that. Majority of times when children run across this, it's accidental, right? It found them. There are algorithms, there are strategies to infect our children with this so that they will be lifelong consumers. And it's why we have to be protective as parents. But my question is, are we also creating those safe spaces and dialogue for our children to talk to us, right? Are we teaching them about the principle of confession and coming forward and healing and creating that safe space where they can talk to us about this and know that it's not something that they have to be ensnared in the shame of, right? Because the things that are kept in darkness stay in darkness. The things that are brought to light free us. And so as parents, we need to create that safe, comfortable space to talk about that and to really address this, because there's been too many people trapped in the shame of it because we have not talked about it as a society enough and what it's doing to our society. So vulnerabilities, there's a lot of children with a history of physical and sexual abuse. Obviously one of the biggest ones. I mean, if a child is growing up in a home of physical or sexual abuse, it's just normalized at that point, right? This is how this person has been taught to show love. Children who live in poverty, and exactly the video, right, is exactly why as we need to stand up as the body to come alongside of our population. It's why God cares so much about justice and caring for the poor and caring for those in need, because we have so many children in this area who live in poverty, who have these extra vulnerabilities. And it's our job to wrap around them. Children in the foster care system, children who live in single-parent households, and then the last one, so many children have access to social media and the internet. And I will say this, I might do my next slide so we'll get to it. Yeah, how to protect your child. We'll go into that a little bit. the first one, and again, how do we protect our children? Always the biggest question. How do we keep our children safe? And Julie touched on this earlier, and I love the thought process in this. I was raised in the South, girl raised in the South. And so, if somebody asked, how many can give me a hug, it's like, I'll give them a hug, no questions asked. You be polite, right? And, we're really starting to just, as a society, wake up to, maybe we shouldn't teach our children to, be forced to run and give a hug. Maybe we need to have some more discernment in talking about what that looks like. As Julie said, though, we do want to talk about discernment because they might be uncomfortable for a reason that's not a safety reason. But we never want to force our children to hug relatives, to, be around people or touch people that we don't want to. Do not allow your children to interact with people they don't know online. This is the biggest one, and it's the hardest one, I'm going to be honest. It's not a one and done thing. And there are lots of videos, resources, and if you want more, I'd love to share more with you about how do we keep our children safe online as far as safety measures. I mean, there's so much good stuff out there now. Pretty good stuff. You can research and find what's most comfortable for you. You can turn all the safety features on. You can monitor consistently, and you will constantly interact with things that you're going to have to make the next move. Because again, technology is forever changing. Our children are getting older. They're getting savvier. It's something you're going to constantly have to stay on top of. And my recommendation to you is if you have children in your life and you just don't even know how to manage this, find some resources. Reach out to your support group. Find out who's parenting at your age as well. See what they're doing. It might not be the greatest, to be honest with you, but find out what resources are out there. Because you can't do it alone. Again, I'd love to give you the list. Just don't let your children do these things. But it's forever changing. The biggest piece of advice I have is wait as long as you can. Right? And y'all have seen it. Have y'all seen kids in kindergarten with cell phones? This is the thing now, right? I'm not trying to cast judgment if you do that, but I will say it's a very dangerous slippery slope. It is. My child begged me, my oldest got a phone and he had to ride a bus. And I felt very strong about that. He goes to it's a charter school, it's a very good school in our area, but he got to the age where he had to ride a bus. And I said, okay, it's time. So we're going to do a phone with training wheels, right? We're going to do a phone that is a safe phone. It was a phone made for a child. But even that, right? All of a sudden there was text messages that came through from numbers I didn't even know about, right? And so there was just issues with that as well. And then we graduated. We actually got a real phone because, in my personal opinion, I could get an iPhone and I could log into his device from another iPhone and see everything he does. And so for me, that's one of the biggest safety things that I could do. And so we did that. And I locked that thing down. Like I took it to one of my friends who really is an expert in law enforcement, like, lock this thing down. And so that happened. And then all of a sudden, he's in school and he's interacting with his friend group, and I start seeing these group chats. And if you want to know what's normal in our children's peer groups right now, just look through one of those group chats. So then we had to create more rules about group chats, and we shut those down. And then he's a teenage boy who likes to game online. I don't know if you know anything about game systems now. In our day, you had a game system, you put in a cartridge, you played. There's no thought of anybody else in the world in that moment. It's you in that room with that controller, right? Maybe you have two controllers if you're lucky and you can play with your friends. Nowadays, gaming systems, there's no two controllers because they don't make games where two people can play them at the same time in the same room anymore. It's all about gaming online. That's all these games are created for. And yeah, sure, you can shut down some things, you can do some things. I thought I was being very clever. I shut down the group chat thing completely. And then found out that, I did a couple of things. One, if you don't have a headset, you can't chat, right? And so didn't get the headset, shut down the group chat. And the next thing you know, we're in the room and we're only playing with our friends on speakerphone. right? Which I'm like, okay, this feels a little safer. I'm looking at the list. Go into the room, a few days later, doing the same thing. It's on speakerphone, that's the rule, the door has to be open. But all of a sudden, I'm looking at the names on the speakerphone list, and there's numbers I don't recognize. And I'm like, who are you talking to? Well, so-and-so's cousin jumped on, right? And so the principle is whatever they think they can get away with, they're going to do the extra thing. We just have to constantly be diligent in monitoring, right? And again, I'm a boy mom, so I'm hyper-vigilant about this whole gaming situation, but I'll also tell you that federal law enforcement, they are doing entire operations based on these gaming systems now, right? And we've heard of things as innocent as Roblox, and we say innocent, not necessarily innocent. These different applications, again, people are going to go in and try to victimize their children. Where will predators be? They're going to be where children are. That's exactly where they're going to be. So we have to be extremely hyper-vigilant, and we just have to be constantly involved. That's my biggest piece of advice. Be constantly involved in your child's life. Know your children's friend group and their parents. And again, you might have different rules about sleepovers, you might have different rules about movies, you might have different rules about different things. I will tell you, I've been surprised at my child calling me and saying, Miss So-and-so said we can watch this. How do you feel about that? You know, Miss So-and-so didn't watch that? Absolutely not. You know, because people have different rules. People have different appetites for what's appropriate, what's acceptable. You know, what they might think you're being completely outrageous by not letting your child watch a PG-13 movie when they're 12 years old, right? But what I feel is that PG-13 movies really were our movies back in the 90s or worse, right? Because again, that continuum of the world just seeping into culture has gotten progressively worse. So we need to have these conversations. We need to know our children's friend group. We need to constantly, as Julie said, be trying to elicit these conversations, right? These conversations need to go beyond, how was your day? What did you learn? My precious husband, we had to get through these. I mean, as soon as he got home from school, what did you learn today? It's like, no, that's not what we start with, right? We need to learn to ask questions of what happened today that made you laugh? What happened today that you found really annoying? Right? You need to ask these deeper questions. What's your favorite class? Who's your favorite friend group that you get to sit by? You know, we need to start asking those questions that really, not in an investigative way, but in a really trying to get to know our children. I'm constantly trying to picture what my big child's day looks like. Who are they interacting with? What kind of conversations are they having? And start to ask those kind of questions. Paint a picture of your day for me and what that looks like. Another thing is there's no such thing as privacy. And this is a big thing online as well. There's no such thing as privacy. Now, we need to do things, when we talk about the phone and the age, again, my child getting on the bus was a big one for us, but I think about, I don't want my child to necessarily turn 18 and then never have access to a phone, never have access to the outside world, right? And now it's just shock. Now it's just a cultural shock. We need to do this in a way that is training wheels on, so that they're prepared for that moment. And Julie spoke a lot about those being prepared for moments that are going to come in the future. But what does that look like? You know, in our house, that we're not ready for social media. We won't be ready for social media for any length of time. But we're talking about social media a lot, because a lot of the friend group does have access to social media. I'm sure that my children see social media on other people's phones. I don't doubt that, right? They're gonna sit beside somebody in the lunchroom. They're gonna be around people who have social media. So it's not an off topic for us. We talk very much about it all the time. We're just not gonna have access to it in our house. I'm constantly looking for devices, right? I'm constantly saying, hey, I see your phone's right there, let me see it. If there's any hesitation in that, we need to have that conversation. Why do we have hesitation in that? Are you scared that I'm gonna see something that I'm not supposed to see? Another thing that we had to talk about was deleting things. because I had one of my son's friends text him and used a choice word that we don't use in our house. And he was nervous if I saw the text, he would be in trouble. So he deleted it, right? Well, in principle, I get that. I understand that. That makes sense. But also, what does that mean if he's deleting things for me not to see it, right? That's a bad practice to get into. And so I had to say, no, leave the cuss word on your phone. It feels very uncomfortable to me as a parent. But we don't delete things off the phone. I've also had to say things like, if they're going to text you things like that, either you're going to tell them not to text you at all, or I'm going to tell them not to text you at all. Like that's, I'm giving you the option, I'm giving you the choice. It's a really hard choice to see your child struggle with that, right? But where's the choice? Are we giving some choice in that? Because as a parent, I would love to say, do not text my child anymore. But it's also really empowering to watch your child say, hey, man, that's just not really cool in my house, so I really need you to not text me anymore. Definitely, as a parent, rewarding to watch your child. Because now he'll do it, and I don't even have to say it anymore. He just knows it's not going to fly, right? And so it's very empowering to teach our children. Talk with them early and often about the dangers of sexual exploitation, pornography, and human trafficking. Again, this feels so uncomfortable as a parent. But our children know, like once they get to a certain age, they're going to know things. They might not know all of the evil behind it, right? But some of these topics they're going to be aware of, right? They're going to be aware that, children will be on social media and creepy adults will talk to them. They're going to be aware of things like that. They're going to be aware that people are going to ask them for pictures, right? And they may sound like innocent pictures. But again, that child is sharing a picture of themselves with somebody, right? That is a grooming tactic in and of itself. So talk with them early and often about this. And I love the example of just studying the real thing, right? Studying what God's plan is for our life, what it is for humanity, what it is for human dignity, how man and woman were created to be, instilling that into our children so that when something doesn't follow that template, does not follow God's plan, then my child can identify that immediately, right? We don't start with the bad things. We don't start with the worldly things. We start with the godly things. We create that template. And so that when the world seeps in, when they start to get introduced to these things that we're preparing them for through practice at home, they can recognize that immediately and know that you are their safe space. And share with them about their identity in Christ, how God created them to be. Because what these people who are trying to victimize our children, what they are doing is they're trying to come into this child's worldview and trying to tell them who they should be, who the world wants them to be, right? And if those things are our children's vulnerabilities, they are quickly going to be deterred by that. And so we need to instill those founding principles of who God created our children to be so that they can fulfill God's will and plan on their life. We have shared a lot. I know that this is heavy stuff. Again, sometimes I wish we would end with Julie because she's just got that very calming, counseling voice. And you feel so empowered afterwards, like you're just ready to go and, start to implement some of these things. And I want us to take a moment and just reflect on that and reflect on the goodness that she shared and to trust the process, right? That as parents, it's not a rinse, wash, and repeat. We know that every child's created differently, every generation's created differently, the problems are different. We have to constantly be on things now that maybe our parents didn't have to, right? Our parents would kick us out the door and say, come on, the street lights come on, right? We live in a very, very different world. But what it means is we get to be involved parents. We get to know our children in a way that wasn't always encouraged, right? We get to be our children's guide in a way that maybe parents haven't had the chance to do before, right? And so we really need to lean into that. And I will tell you, we see tragedy after tragedy. We have seen the worst of the worst. but I have seen God redeem some of the most horrible situations. I have seen redemption. I have seen children's lives and trajectories change because people like you came here for education and sat in a room and talked about different topics and recognized it and learned resources, right? And those resources came and intervened and helped in a child's life or helped in a person's life. So there is hope out there, absolutely. So I know we want to, I do want to share this. This is a resource. It is free. It is Anti-Trafficking 101. It is just a video series that is free to anybody. And that is a QR code that continues that. It's 6 short videos. They're like 2 to 3 minutes. And it just talks about definitions of human trafficking. And it was created by one more child, so it's similar to what we talked about today, maybe a little more of that. One helpful thing on there is how to report. Because we talk about, if you see something, say something, what does that mean? Right? Sometimes that's very difficult. And so there is one on there that I think is very helpful. And it talks about, you're in the area, again, we're in Orlando, there's a lot of instances of trafficking right around us, or exploitation right around us. What do you pay attention to in that moment? How do you react? I will tell you, you don't walk up to somebody who looks like a trafficker and say, hey, you're trafficking. You don't do that. You don't put anybody's safety in danger. But you might want to take note of a couple of things. I will tell you the biggest takeaway of that is you make the call. You call law enforcement. I work with law enforcement all the time, and they will say make the call. Because even if that person has left the situation, even if they can't run out there and intervene in that moment, what you've given them is intelligence, right? Because if you start to describe a person, and they are there maybe with young girls, and it looks like the young girls are scared, and they aren't able to speak for themselves, or there's some indicators there, well, guess what if they get 2 or 3 reports about the same looking person in the same area? That's very powerful intelligence to law enforcement. So please don't think you're wasting somebody's time, don't think you're crazy, and you don't know, you don't know, you're not sure, you don't want to get anybody in trouble. Law enforcement will say 10 times out of 10, make the phone call. So here's some available resources. Again, Julie's written a lot of books, kids books, books about parenting, just a lot of different topics. So I do recommend you go online and check out additional resources there. I do think we have some time for Q&A. Julie, do you want to come up? Is that okay? Lisa, I can get some extra time. If you want to sit. But we do have some time for question and answer. And again, anything we talked about today, anything we haven't talked about that you would like for us to touch on, any questions you may have.
Do you consider a grooming of children, the transgender and the whole woke thing part of child abuse? Jody, could you just repeat the questions so the microphone?
Sure. So she asked, do we consider just the popularity of transgenderism and woke culture and all of that tactics for grooming? I think it's evidence of a fallen world and those just, again, outside worldly things trying to influence our children. Absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the different apps that have, like, especially social media apps that our children are using that have really become prevalent? I know a lot of cases you guys work with one more child and whatnot, but some of those might look like the parents you know aware of. For example, if I saw Snapchat on my child's phone, I would be a lot more concerned than if I saw Twitter on my child's phone.
Yeah, it's a great point, Lisa. And so they aren't all created equal. That is true. Snapchat is one of the most popular amongst them. Julie, please tell me.
Snapchat, OnlyFans, Discord,
Snapchat.
calculator.
So Snapchat, and really kind of was, and I don't want to say it was the first, but one of the first most popular that was created. The whole purpose was that the images just disappear, right? You can send something and it's short-lived, and also those images are gone, right? And the creator, I could be wrong about this, but I have heard created it for nefarious reasons. for the exact reason that, and it just disappeared, you could share something inappropriate and it's gone. Well, first off, images don't just disappear, they live somewhere, right? And so that's something to tell our children. Again, things live in perpetuity. Now, later on, it doesn't mean that law enforcement or prosecutors can always get access to those things. They create barriers on purpose for that, but it lives somewhere, right? So Snapchat is very alarming. It was existed so that things disappear. And again, it's very popular among our children. It's one of the least safe. There's a Snapchat map that you can just find out what everybody is in their location, right? And I know that's similar on iPhone, but this is something that if you sign up the app and you don't change anything, you're on the Snapchat app. Somebody can track you wherever you go. So next Snapchat is that OnlyFans, oh my goodness, that's online exploitation. People are creating websites and it is videos of live things, and it is just complete online sexual exploitation. It is being glamorized in culture. We are working more and more with particularly young ladies who say, but I want to travel when I turn 18. And this is the only way I can get the money to do that, right? So we're glamorizing culture, those worldly things are becoming idolized, and then they're being taught that this is how I get them, right? And again, we think not my children, but just be wary of who's around your children, and who can be speaking into them. There is an app called Calculator, and it looks like a calculator, and if you go into it, it opens up this whole other page of apps they might be trying to hide, right? It's an app just to hide apps, so there's that. So again, Twitter is more well-known for breaking news. A lot of politicians use it, a lot of sports people use it. Not going to be as much exploitation on that type of site, not going to be as much recruitment. That's really what we're looking for on that type of site. Instagram, probably, right? Very popular among teenagers, but it's on every single one of them. And you can go and view exploitation or pornography on every single one of them. All you have to put in is a hashtag, whatever, and it will pull it right up. Exactly. So again, I hate to say be leery of all of them, but you should be cautious. But there's been more than various ones. I mean, if your child even knows what OnlyFans is, you need to have some conversations. Why do they know what that is? Where did they get that information from? Same thing with Discord. Again, where would they come and encounter Discord? These are some of the really bad ones on the list.
Pinterest even, Pinterest has things that will bring kids and bring them in. But just to piggyback off of that point, private Christian school 6th grade girl who in middle school was Snapchatting probably 2 men a day, just Snapchatting them, and she was bragging about how she was getting them to send her new photos, or she was sending photos, or she was collecting her data on them. Many Christian homes that I work with who two parents, loving home, teaching them all the right things, but they're going into school systems where it's just perfectly normal to be sexting. And parents are mortified. They're bringing their children into counseling, asking me to meet with them, and saying, why in the world would they do this? We talk them better, they know better, there's no reason for them to be doing it. And I'll talk with teenager after teenager who says, Julie, they just look at it, Julie, like everybody around me is doing it. It's so normalized. And so this goes back to a metaphor that Jody talked about the current that our kids are swimming in, whether it's a secular, liberal world system, whether it's a godless, whether it's a sexualized, it all does blend together. That we teach our kids to swim, but even the strongest swimmers drown. Why is that? Because you don't always see how strong the current is, or they get stuck in their touch. Why do even strong swimmers drown, yet we don't expect our children to, or we're not careful with our children? That's true in our culture, that we minimize the current our kids are swimming in, either because we say, well, I grew up in this school, or I grew up in similar situations, or I faced temptations. There's nothing new under the sun. And that's true, there is no new evil under the sun, but the way in which that evil presents is new. And the strength of it is new, and the current is much stronger than ever before. And so I think we minimize because we don't understand the kind of waters our kids are swimming in, how strong the current is, and it's sweeping them away. And quite honestly, if I were a counselor and didn't do this for a week, I wouldn't know either. I would think, well, I'm raising my kids well, I'm taking them to church, I'm teaching them, I'm discipling them, I'm telling them the right things to do. They're strong enough to sustain the current. But I'd be minimizing how strong the current is.
I know from another resource that talks about the things that we had discussed that a lot of times these predators, they will infiltrate, like you said, into a public forum like gaming, and they befriend them there, and then they initiate discussions in another app, and then they get them there, and then they kind of perform the web so that they can get more information and track them more easily, and then obviously exchange transactions, whether, oh, you've got an Amazon wish list, let me buy you something from there, and then they start relationships using false AI images of people and portray themselves as others. Can you speak more to like what parents can do if they notice a trend, or how they can get their kids to realize what to look for?
Yeah, I'll let Jody actually answer the majority of that. But what I will say to that, going back to the sexting and even the OnlyFans and the glamorizing of sex and the normalizing of sexual liberty to our kids is actually what leads to some of that. Because, I know there are teen girls, again, these aren't girls who are on the fringe, they're girls who are in their homes who'll say, yeah, I want to travel. Or I like the fact I get money, or I like the attention I'm getting. And so it is another gateway into all the things you're talking about. So that's what leads to so many exploitation situations, is kids are already trained to say, well, what's the big deal? And so once you normalize behavior that shouldn't be normalized, it's just a step removed from victimization.
That's good, Julie, and this is me and my Julie brain just thinking, we're getting ahead of that by asking questions. Asking questions like, well, what do you think is a normal gap in age today, right? What would a 24-year-old want to do with dating a 17-year-old? Is that normal to you, having those conversations? Why would, do you think it's normal that someone you don't know would buy you something offline? Right, phrasing that in a way that's starting to get those wheels turning, where our children are starting to use discernment. Because if we've never had these conversations, that 13, 14, 15-year-old online might not ever think, well, that is abnormal that he's 22, 23 and buying me stuff, right? That is abnormal. Someone I've never met just wants to buy. My parents don't want to buy me these things. My distributor want to buy me these things. So kind of tapping into that discernment. But yes, it is true. It is a web, and they will start on one application and maybe lead them to another. We see a lot of stories like that. But I do want to caution too. A lot of times we think that the end game to that is to have that child then meet up with that person, right? Or share information where that person can meet up with that person. And that does happen. We see it happen in the news. Tragically, we hear those cases. But our children actually never even have to leave their rooms to be sexually exploited. We have children who have been sexually exploited and trafficked who have never actually been physically touched by anybody else. That is the world we live in now, because everything is on an online platform, right? And so we want to be cautious, and we want to look for those different signs to see that something is progressing, right? I have red flags of talking with anybody that I don't know in person, right? That's a rule in our house. If you've never met this person in person, if mom does not know this person, you don't talk to them, period. Online. So, start that point right there. But also, we're not looking for where it progressed to the next level, because it might have not progressed out of being online, but that child could have still been exploited.
This is gonna go to my whole can of worms. So I walked in here very anxious this morning, just understanding the enormity of this topic and understanding how Seminole County is so affected. now I feel like I can't wait to get to my car, get home, grab all of my grandkids, lock them in a room, and just shut everything off that has any electrical power. So, without me doing that, give me some idea of the best way to start proceeding with this. I'm not gonna run in and go, stranger danger, don't ever run from strangers. Like, it's just so overwhelming that you have resources, but are there visuals kind or more like if I put a YouTube video on that kind of introduces this? I just feel so even more anxious now because this is, I knew all this, but now what is the best approach so I don't immediately rush out and just walk away?
I love that you're saying that because that's absolutely exactly what you shouldn't walk away from. But that is, I mean, that can be, so here's what I often say to parents. Fearful parents, grandparents, adults raise fearful children. We don't want to raise fear. And fear handicaps our kids. It does not equip them. It makes them think the whole world's a dangerous place. Or they write you and I off completely because they think we're crazy and inconsequential, so they don't listen to us. Neither are helpful. So we're talking about not being in denial about what does exist, but then the pendulum can't swing to a fear-based approach. It needs to swing to an educated, confident approach. And so how do you educate yourself? Read good resources. There are videos. I mean, that's why some of this stuff's really helpful because you shouldn't be afraid, but you should be aware and you should make your kids aware. So, my 5 kids will roll their eyes at me or they'll joke stranger danger. My boys love saying that because they know it gets me every time. Or they'll talk about, Discord bad because they like to be on Discord. And I'll say, I'm glad you're hearing me. Even if you're writing it off, they're not really writing it off, but they are in a safe environment where we've been very guarded, everything that Jody's talking about. And so they haven't experienced the brokenness of it. And you know what, if I get an eye roll because they haven't experienced the brokenness of it, so they don't believe it, I'll know that. That's better than them experiencing the brokenness of it, right? And again, we're very matter of fact and try to add levity into conversations. We just tell funny stories about my kids or talk about things because I want to model that it doesn't have to be a deep sit down, look how bad everything is, but it is a constantly paying attention. And so when things come up on the news or when they come home and they'll come home and tell stories. So a great way to do it is, though our kids are sometimes afraid of telling us what's going on in their lives or what they've been exposed to, they'll tell you what everybody else has been exposed to. And so I'll often say to my guys, tell me what 9th grade boys are talking about these days. And man, they'll all rat out their friends left and right. They tell me about, well, you won't believe this one's vaping in the bathroom, this one's doing this one's doing that. Really? Actually, I do believe it. But besides that, tell me, what do you do when you hear that stuff? I don't stay away from it, Mom. You do? Well, has anybody ever asked you if you wanted to date? Or has anybody ever offered you a date? Or have you ever been tempted to date? See how you start out here with, tell me what's going on in the 10th grade girls' world, or tell me what's going on in the 8th grade boys these days. They'll tell you, but then you're slowly getting a window into their world. What are they being exposed to? What are kids talking about? What do they know? Like Jody said, we go home and just say, hey, you guys know what OnlyFans is. You'll be surprised at all know what OnlyFans is. There's so many ways for just asking questions and inviting conversation. All to say is talk often, talk early, talk soon. Talk often, talk all the time. That's that constant practice. Deuteronomy 6 talks about whether you're walking by the way, whether you rise, whether you sit, but you're always talking about things in the Word. And we're always engaging our kids in what's going on in the world around them. So talk often, talk freely. Don't be afraid to model it. So even awkward conversations, I'll joke and say, well, make it to read it. It's not comfortable talking about some of this stuff, but our kids need to see that we can handle talking about it. That we're not afraid of talking about the hard stuff. So you're talking often, talking freely, you're talking soon, which means we want to proactively shape our children's views on these issues, not wait till they get the corrupted version of them. And God creates it, and the world corrupts. I want to start with the way God created sex to be, or gender to be, or relationships to be. God creates food, the world corrupts it. God creates relationships, the world corrupts it. God creates sex, the world corrupts it. Don't wait for the corruption. start and teach our kids the creation of it. So going back to your asking where do you start, there are so many good books, so many good resources. That's the pros, the world we live in, that there are resources out there that you and I as adults don't have to just try to make up a conversation. There's even apps just for talking it out with your kids. It could be about any topic in the world, but what you're doing is you're teaching your kids to have meaningful relationships where they live on their devices and they do it through screens instead. So tons of really good resources. You can Google almost any of these topics so you don't have to do it alone. Just great resources to turn to. Things that are coming up. The Safeguards book is actually then turned into a school curriculum for Christian schools because a lot of public schools have safety and abuse curriculum, but there are a lot of things that we wouldn't agree with. And people of faith wouldn't agree with. So we wanted a version that Christian schools could use that would teach how to think about safety and these issues in godly ways. There's great books coming out too on how to talk to kids about safety issues. So all kinds of potential resources out there. And then Jody, you can talk too about some of the resources that we're talking about.
We're creating a OBI next month that is online safety. So it deals completely with online safety. And it starts with online citizenship because it's a paradigm shift for us, but our children and us now, we're existing in two different worlds, right? We are now citizens here, but we also have a citizenship online, right? And we don't think of it. It's why we have people who are trolls online or online bullies, right? Because they're not thinking of their responsibility in the online space. But the reality is we are citizens there. We are responsible to God there even, right? We have to represent ourselves a certain way there, right? We wouldn't go to school or go to our place of work and do something that would damage our reputation there, but people feel a lot of freedom to go online and say whatever they want and do whatever they want. So starting to think of that in a way that's a citizenship online and how I conduct myself online is a very powerful way to start to teach our children that what they do online matters. And so it starts there. But the other thing I would say that's probably the difficult part because, I doubt a lot of people in this room are starting with just infant children and you get to carry this wisdom all the way through to adulthood. A lot of us are starting in a place, as I said before, fear-based parenting. I was definitely that. I'd seen the worst of the worst while raising my first child. But the reality is it's never too late. It might be painful. We've had to pull back on some things even in our own house. So I have a toddler now and a teenager. Well, guess what happened when we had the toddler? The teenager got a little bit more screen time than he's permitted. And we really got to this phase where it was like, man, I'm talking to my husband and I'm like, this is not, it's not our structure. It's gotten a little out of control. We pulled it back. It was painful, right? You might have a 15-year-old child or grandchild and prayerfully the parents are going to listen, where they are on social media, right? You might need to pull that back. You might need to say, you might need to humble yourself before the Lord and before your children, and you might need to say, we made a mistake, and we have taken this too far, and we're taking this from you. And that is very uncomfortable, and they are not going to be thrilled. But you know what? The fight that you're going to initially have, what you're going to start to see after you've pulled any of these things back, is in a week or two, it really doesn't take long, you're going to see a child that has been alleviated from a lot more stress and a stronger current than they actually really care to swim. You're going to start to know the positives that they feel about that being taken away. So that's the biggest thing I want to empower you with. Pull back. Right? You can always give it back when we start to talk about these things with discernment and start to utilize some of these skills. But do the painful thing. Pull it back if you let it get out of control.
What are some best practices for supporting child survivors of sex exploitation?
It's a great question. The question is, what are some of the best practices in supporting children who have this type of trauma? I will say we really try to approach it from a comprehensive approach, right? So we're looking at a few different things. We're looking at that child holistically. What does their living situation look like? What are their current needs? Does this child have needs that can be physically met? We're doing that. We're looking at this child's spiritual needs, and so we're coming alongside of them in that way too, and spiritual healing from that type of abuse. And then really helping to support that family unit. So we really believe in a model that one, again, has those lived experience experts. They can use their history of pain and trauma as a bridge of connection. And again, that's something most of us can't do. And so having a person that's able to speak into a child's life that way is powerful. If you don't have that, that's okay. If you don't have access to that, that's okay. We have access to that in this area, luckily. But having mental health counseling, appropriate mental health counseling is important. Trauma is a real thing. And trauma changes the brain and it changes how the brain is affected. However, how the Lord created us, that brain is pliable. The brain can be healed. Trauma can be worked through. There can be tools that are implemented in that child's toolbox to help them overcome trauma symptoms affiliated with that type of trauma. So we try to come in very quickly with those type of services. And then last, the family unit. We don't talk about it enough. We don't talk about how a child being exploited affects that family unit, or how vulnerabilities in that family led to that child being exploited. But really what you're starting to see is a new approach of expertise that really takes what we call a two-generational approach. And it's that, for years we thought we could remove the child from the situation, we could give all the treatment to the world to the child, and then return the child, but the problem still exists, right? Because that family unit typically has some vulnerabilities or has experienced trauma itself now that is just not helpful in the healing process. And so we really look at that two-generational approach and wrapping that entire family with support as well.
That's good.
Great question.
Something that keeps kind of going around in my head is we have a generation of parents of young children right now who they themselves are constantly on the phone. So this modeling is a concern of mine. I don't know. I mean, you don't want to tell your children or other people you know how to parent their own children. It's a tough decision. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or how to help if we can or not.
Sure, Julie, you might as well. And you know what? I try to be so mindful of. I mean, it's just, we all are so much more divisive than we ever have been before. I would be lying to you if I didn't say I was in the room sometime with my small child and had, I just felt that when I put your phone down, right? We all have to balance that. We have to be cognizant about that. And it's hard to tell other people what to do. I get that. I would say a few things I would really lean into are some resources. There are great documentaries out there that really kind of lift the veil behind what this digital online world means and what it means for us. One being The Social Dilemma. It's actually on Netflix. It's almost a 2-hour documentary. And you sit down, it's kind of one of those things you leave a little bit more fearful, so you gotta kind of work within that. But it really kind of lays out how the entire system of our phone and the internet and all of that, they have goals associated with how many times we pick up that screen per day. And we pick up that screen hundreds of times per day.
What's the name of that?
The social dilemma. The social dilemma. And you can experiment with this stuff too. So I deleted some apps off my phone. I just took a reprieve from Facebook and a few different ones. And all of a sudden, I think it was like 2 or 3 weeks in, I got a text from Facebook telling me that so-and-so made a post I may be interested in. So they will continue, they evolve their tactics to try to get you to lift that phone, to make it more addictive. So I would just suggest that documentary. I mean, that would be a great start to create more awareness.
So you're bringing up a hard challenge just when you're a grandparent. How much do your children let you speak into their world and their parenting too? And so sometimes you're looking for what are just some really good resources I can give them, like a book or like you could send them, or watching a Netflix video. There's several like that out right now that talk about that. But it's how do you help parents see that they're doing the same things that they are going to be teaching their children to do, or should be teaching their kids to do, or how many marriages are falling apart because people are doom scrolling all night long and they're not engaging in having conversations. So this isn't just a kid issue, this is a relational issue going on. I see all the time in counseling where marriages feel like somebody feels like they're being unfaithful with their phone because they're always on. So the challenge is how do you speak into the next generation's life and how they're parenting, they're drinking, I call it drinking cultural Kool-Aid. That's just what they do to have a phone. And it is, technology's here to stay. Technology's not evil, it's what we do that's good for people, but it is highly addictive. And the fact that our kids are growing up with screens instead of streams, that they're not outside, that they don't understand the sanctity of life like they once did, because everything is digital. And we're slowly losing generations that remembers what it's like to not have a cell phone at all growing up, right? So I think that happens in a relationship when people want to hear us and willing to listen to us. And so that's number one, how do I win voice with the people I'm trying to speak to who will listen that, hey, maybe it's not a good idea. And maybe you should listen to this author, or you should listen to this video, or you should at least consider listening it with me to talk about it. Because I know way too many parents normalizing that it's not a big deal. And it is shocking how many kids are on social media, yet how young they are getting with the cell phones as well. And that means that as adults, schools are being like, I hear people complain all the time about why schools aren't getting cell phones and why certain things are not happening in schools. And some level I agree. The problem is schools aren't doing anything because of cell phones. And yet we're expecting them to police it for parents when it's the parents who are giving it to the children. And so it is a parental issue, not a school issue. But we're seeing it land on schools, and schools now are taking stance because it's preventing kids from being educated. Kids do not want to learn. They can't sit through a period without wanting to bring their cell phone out or having earpods in their ear and hanging it behind their long hair so that they can be listening and not paying attention in class. It's an epidemic issue, and it starts with parents giving their children a cell phone. So you are on to something now. The challenge is how to speak in ways that will be heard.
Yeah, it's a challenge. And the other thing I would encourage you to do is you can be that safe space, right, to talk to those children as well, or have those children talk to you. Creating that safe environment. And just pray, impart as much wisdom as you can, and share resources. Okay. There's no other questions, Lisa?
I just want to thank you both for your wisdom and your expertise today. I know we all learned a tremendous amount of things. I think the revolution is the way I'm parenting. Thank you, Julie, for all of that wisdom. If we could just have Father close us out in prayer, please.
Thank you again. I'm just mindful of some of the things that struck me was, that where the children are, that's where the predators are. Sometimes we don't think about that. That if there's children there, that's where they want to be. The other thing that was just mind-boggling for me is to think that a child can be exploited and trafficked and never leave their room. And not to think that way. We think that we're safeguarding them in their room, but it can also happen there. And it's probably the place where it's most likely to happen. So definitely I've received a lot of information that I can't wait to write up and share again with family and friends. And I hope, again, that you do the same as well.
So let us pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for creating us in your divine image and your divine likeness. And thank you for imparting wisdom to us, helping us to understand a bit more of the evil that is in our world, but also the hope and the resources and the tools that you have given us to better safeguard our children and better connect us with you and with one another. Thank you for reminding us to have those uncomfortable conversations, to continue talking openly, freely, and never soon enough. Thank you for dialogue with us and allowing us to safeguard our children. May you always be our shield, our rock, our refuge, our protector, and may we constantly invite our children to get to know you even more better, who safeguards us all, who keeps the world in the palm of your hand. May your blessing come upon us, and may we place our hope, all our hope and trust in you, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Go in peace. Thanks be to God. Let's say thank you once again to our business.